I completed the final pressure seal check on the Abyssal Explorer's hatch while monitoring our descent rate on the main console. 8 meters per minute, slow enough to equalize pressure properly, fast enough to reach my target depth within the mission window. The titanium hull creaked softly around me as we sank deeper into the Marianas Trench, a sound that would have unnerved most people but had become almost comforting to me over the years, like an old ship settling into its journey. "Passing 600 meters, Miranda," I said into my headset microphone, eyes fixed on the depth gauge. "All systems nominal." "Confirmed, Eris." Miranda's voice came through with just a hint of static. "Tracking you on sonar. Current descent path looks good." I looked up through the curved acrylic viewport at the rapidly dimming surface light. The Oceanic Pioneer, our research vessel and my only connection to the world above, was already shrinking to a dark smudge against the blue-green backdrop. Soon it would vanish completely as I descended into the abyss. "Surface vessel visibility diminishing," I reported, making a note in my log. "Light penetration decreasing as expected." The cramped interior of the Abyssal Explorer was filled with the gentle hum of life support systems and the soft blue glow from instrument panels. I'd spent the last 6 years helping design this submersible, and the familiar surroundings felt more like home than my actual apartment back in Seattle. 3,000 pounds of scientific equipment packed into a space not much larger than a minivan. My back already ached from the hunched position in the pilot's seat, but discomfort was the price of discovery. "How's our friend handling your departure?" Miranda asked, a hint of amusement in her voice. She meant Eliza. Dr. Eliza Wentworth, my research partner and the most brilliant and cautious marine biologist I'd ever worked with. "Still thinks I'm making a terrible mistake," I said, adjusting the submersible's trim to maintain our descent angle. She made that abundantly clear during the pre-launch briefing. The argument from this morning still played through my head. Eliza standing on the deck, arms crossed, listing all the reasons this solo dive was, in her exact words, reckless academic suicide. Her voice had remained measured and scientific, but the concern in her eyes had been genuine. "This is premature, Eris," she had said. "We need more mapping data before sending a manned vessel into that caldera. The structural integrity of those volcanic walls is questionable at best." She wasn't wrong. But the window for this expedition was closing fast, funding was running out, and weather patterns were shifting. It was now or potentially never. "Passing 1,000 meters, I reported to Miranda. "Activating external lights." I flipped the switch for the powerful LED array mounted on the Explorer's exterior. The darkness outside immediately gave way to a cone of brilliant illumination, revealing the endless blue void below. Nothing yet but open water. The seabed was still thousands of meters beneath me. "Received," Miranda replied. "Dr. Wentworth is requesting hourly status updates rather than the standard 2-hour check-ins." I smiled to myself. Typical Eliza. Her way of maintaining some control over a situation she couldn't stop. "Tell her she'll get her updates as long as communications hold," I said. "But remind her that we're expecting signal degradation once I enter the caldera." As the submersible continued its descent, I ran through the mission parameters again in my mind. The target was an underwater volcano in the southern section of the Challenger Deep, the deepest known part of the Marianas Trench. Most people pictured the trench as a simple crack in the ocean floor, but it was actually a complex system of canyons, mountains, and geological features. This particular seamount had caught our attention because of anomalous temperature readings picked up during remote sensing passes. "Passing 2,500 meters, I reported. Temperature outside holding steady at 3.6 degrees Celsius. I kept my eyes on the external cameras as the descent continued. occasional marine snow, particles of organic matter drifting down from surface waters, floated past the viewport, illuminated by my lights like tiny stars against the black backdrop of the deep ocean. "Be advised," Miranda's voice came through with more static now. "Satellite imagery is showing some current shifts about 2 kilometers east of your position. Shouldn't affect your trajectory, but flagging it for your awareness." "Noted," I replied, making an adjustment to the navigation system. "I'll maintain current course unless conditions change." 4 hours into the descent, the featureless blue began to give way to the first hints of the seafloor. The sonar was picking up the rising topography of the underwater mountain range that formed the eastern edge of the trench. Somewhere ahead lay my target, the caldera of an extinct underwater volcano that, according to our preliminary data, contained a breach in its northern wall. "Visual confirmation of seafloor features," I reported, feeling the familiar rush of excitement that came with entering unexplored territory. "Sonar mapping is matching our predicted topography so far." "Good to hear," Miranda responded. "Surface conditions remain stable. Captain Vasquez says to tell you she's keeping the Pioneer right above your position." The descent continued for another hour, the Explorer moving both downward and laterally now as I guided it toward the coordinates of the underwater volcano. At just over 7,000 meters deep, the pressure outside was crushing, over 700 times that at sea level. Even a tiny breach in the hull would mean instant death. "Passing 8,000 meters, I reported, entering final approach to target area. Through the viewport, I could now make out the massive form of the underwater volcano rising from the ocean floor. Unlike their surface counterparts, underwater volcanoes often formed wide, gently sloping mounds rather than sharp peaks. This one, however, was unusually steep-sided, with a clearly defined caldera at its summit. A massive crater formed when the magma chamber below had emptied and collapsed. "Visual confirmation of target," I said, feeling my heart rate increase. "It's impressive." "Define impressive," Miranda prompted. "Scale exceeds our estimates by at least 20%, I replied, checking the sonar readings. "Caldera walls appear to be approximately 300 meters high with near vertical faces in some sections." As I maneuvered the Explorer closer to the volcano's flanks, I couldn't help thinking about Eliza's warnings again. She had opposed this dive from the moment I'd proposed it, arguing that we needed more remote data before risking a manned mission. "The structural integrity of those walls is unknown," she had insisted during our final planning meeting. "One underwater landslide, one collapse of an unstable section, and you'd be crushed before you could react." Her concern was professionally valid, but I knew there was more to it. We'd been research partners for 7 years. She was looking out for me, not just the project. Approaching the northern section of the caldera, I reported to Miranda. "I'm seeing what appears to be the breach we identified in the satellite mapping." The breach was a massive rent in the otherwise steep walls of the volcano's crater, a gap that, according to our theories, had been created when part of the wall had collapsed during the volcano's last eruption, millions of years ago. "I'm picking up something unusual on the temperature sensors," I said, frowning at the instrument panel. "Water temperature increasing slightly as I approach the breach. Current reading is 4.2 degrees Celsius. "That's higher than expected for this depth," Miranda noted. "Could indicate geothermal activity." "Exactly what I'm thinking," I replied, my excitement building. "If there's still heat being released from below, it could create a microclimate within the caldera." The breach loomed ahead now, a massive dark opening in the wall of rock. My exterior lights barely penetrated its depths. I adjusted the Explorer's ballast and nudged the thrusters forward, guiding us slowly toward the entrance. "Entering the breach now," I reported. Width is approximately 70 meters, more than enough clearance for the explorer. Signal strength dropping to 80%, Miranda reported. The rock walls are starting to interfere with transmission. I acknowledged her warning but kept moving forward. The walls of the breach rose up on either side of the submersible dark volcanic rock covered in sparse deep-sea organisms, sponges, soft corals, and other creatures adapted to life in the crushing depths. Temperature continuing to rise, I noted, now at 4.8 degrees, definitely indicative of geothermal activity within the caldera. The passage through the breach was like traveling through a massive underwater canyon. The rock walls narrowed slightly as I progressed, but still left plenty of room for the explorer to maneuver. I kept my speed slow and steady, mindful of Eliza's warnings about structural instability. Signal dropping to 50%. Miranda's voice came through with significant static now. If it gets much worse, we may lose real-time communication. I'll proceed with caution, I assured her. If we lose contact, I'll retreat to the breach entrance to re-establish communication before continuing. As the explorer emerged from the other side of the passage, I found myself staring into the vast interior of the Volcanoes caldera. My exterior lights seemed pitifully inadequate against the enormous dark space ahead. I've entered the caldera, I reported. Initial visual observation suggests. My words were cut short as the communication system emitted a harsh burst of static, then fell silent. Miranda, I called. Miranda, do you copy? I checked the communication panel. Signal strength, 0%. The thick rock walls of the caldera had completely blocked transmission to the surface. I was now utterly alone, nearly 8 kilometers beneath the ocean surface, inside an ancient underwater volcano, with no connection to the outside world. Taking a deep breath, I activated the explorer's internal recording system. Communications with surface lost at 14:38 hours. I spoke clearly for the log. As anticipated, the caldera walls are blocking all transmission signals. Proceeding with exploration as planned. We'll return to breach point in 40 minutes to re-establish contact. Despite the isolation, I felt strangely calm. This was always a possibility we'd planned for. I had enough life support for 72 hours, and the explorer was equipped with emergency protocols to assist in returning to the surface if necessary. I guided the submersible further into the caldera, sweeping my external lights across the interior space. What I saw made me forget the communications issue entirely. The caldera interior is substantially larger than our mapping indicated, I dictated for the record. Initial estimate puts the diameter at over 3 kilometers. The floor appears relatively flat, with numerous small vents visible. I checked the temperature gauge again. 5.6 degrees Celsius, notably warmer than the water outside the caldera. As I descended toward the floor of the crater, another observation struck me. Water clarity is exceptional, I noted. Visibility extends at least 50 meters in the beam of my lights, far greater than typical for these depths. This was unusual. Deep ocean water, especially near geothermal features, typically contained suspended particles that limited visibility. Here, it was almost unnaturally clear. The reason became apparent as I approached one of the small vents in the caldera floor. A steady stream of water appeared to be flowing upward from the opening, fresh water being continually circulated through the system, filtered by the volcanic rock itself. Then I saw them. At first, just a few darting shapes at the edge of my lights, then more and more as I swept the beams across the caldera floor. Life forms, I whispered, then remembered to speak up for the recorder. Numerous marine organisms visible. Density far exceeds normal populations at this depth. I maneuvered closer, adjusting the camera systems to capture as much detail as possible. Fish-like creatures with peculiar anatomical features swam in schools near the vents. Crustaceans unlike any I'd seen before crawled across the volcanic substrate. Translucent invertebrates pulsed through the water column. "This is unprecedented," I continued, unable to keep the excitement from my voice. "The abundance and diversity of life here defies all expectations for an environment at this depth." As I guided the explorer in a slow circle around the center of the caldera, the full picture began to emerge. The geothermal vents were creating a temperate microclimate, while the enclosed nature of the caldera protected it from the harsh conditions of the open trench. The clearer water allowed for better light penetration from bioluminescent organisms, which I could now see glowing softly throughout the water column. The implications were staggering. With growing excitement, I realized I had found a geothermal refugium, a protected pocket where ancient species could potentially have survived unchanged for millennia, sheltered from the evolutionary pressures of the outside ocean. "Sample collection protocol initiated," I said aloud, recording my actions as I'd done throughout my career. With no connection to the surface, these recordings would be the only evidence of what I found until I returned. Water temperature holding at 5.7 degrees Celsius, approximately 3 degrees above expected ambient temperature for this depth. I eased the submersible toward the caldera floor, keeping a careful eye on depth and pressure readings. The volcanic rock below was covered with what appeared to be bacterial mats, white and orange colonies stretching across the terrain like living carpets. I adjusted the external camera to capture wide-angle footage. "Extensive microbial communities visible on substrate," I noted. "Likely chemosynthetic bacteria feeding on sulfur compounds from geothermal activity." What caught my attention next made me lean forward against my harness. Small fish-like creatures, dozens of them, swam through my lights. They didn't match any known species from these depths. Their morphology suggested adaptations to the unique conditions of this isolated ecosystem. "Multiple vertebrate organisms observed," I said, tracking them with the camera. "Approximately 15 to 20 centimeters in length. Translucent skin with visible internal organs. No obvious photophores, unusual for this depth." I activated the water sampling mechanism, extending the collection arm from the submersible's underside. The hydraulics worked smoothly as the arm positioned the intake valve in the water. I collected 3 separate samples, each automatically sealed and preserved in the external sample bay. First set of water samples collected at current depth of 8,200 meters, I said, preparing to navigate toward what appears to be a hydrothermal vent field visible 200 meters to the northwest. I adjusted the thruster controls, feeling the gentle push as the submersible moved forward. The caldera floor sloped gradually downward, and in the distance I could see what I'd been hoping to find, the distinctive plumes of black smokers. These hydrothermal vents were among the most fascinating ecosystems on Earth, supporting life through chemosynthesis rather than photosynthesis. "Multiple active hydrothermal vents identified," I reported. "Approximately 12 visible black smokers ranging from an estimated 3 to 15 meters in height." As I approached the vent field, the temperature gauge showed another slight increase. Water temperature now at 6.2 degrees Celsius. Ambient water becoming increasingly influenced by hydrothermal activity. The submersible's external sensors were collecting data on water chemistry, pH, dissolved oxygen, metal content, sulfide concentrations. All of it would help build a profile of this unique environment. The largest vent came into view through my forward viewport. It stood at least 15 meters tall, like a bizarre underwater chimney. From its top, a continuous plume of dark, mineral-laden water billowed upward. The water around the vent was clouded with particles, creating a stark contrast against the clearer water of the caldera. "Approaching primary vent structure," I narrated. "Mineral precipitation evident along exterior surfaces. likely composed primarily of iron sulfides, giving it the characteristic black color. I steered closer, maintaining a safe distance to avoid the superheated water emerging from the vent. The exterior temperature sensors were already registering localized hotspots in the water column. Temperature gradient increasing sharply near vent plume, reading hotspots of up to 20 degrees Celsius within 3 meters of emission point. What truly fascinated me was the life surrounding the vent. The base was encrusted with what appeared to be tube worms, similar to those found at other hydrothermal sites, but with notable differences in size and arrangement. These specimens were larger, with tubes extending up to 2 meters in length. Extensive colony of apparent tube worms surrounding base of primary vent, I observed. Morphologically similar to Riftia pachyptila, but significantly larger. Likely represent a new species or perhaps even genus. I collected more water samples near the vent, taking care to document the exact locations. I also deployed one of the small remote sampling devices, a claw-like mechanism that could extract small biological samples and store them in preservation fluid. Extracting tissue sample from tube worm colony for genetic analysis, I said as I operated the controls. The claw extended, carefully snipped a small section from one of the tube worms, and retracted into its storage compartment. I was so focused on the collection process that I almost missed the first ping on the sonar. When I noticed it, I frowned and adjusted the display. Something large had moved behind a rock formation approximately 80 meters away. Sonar contact detected, I said, my voice betraying a hint of surprise. Large biological signature moving at bearing 045 relative to current position. I adjusted the sonar settings, trying to get a better reading. The signature appeared again, more clearly this time. Whatever it was massive, far larger than anything I would have expected to find in this environment. Contact dimensions. This can't be right, I muttered, double-checking the readings. Sonar indicates object approximately 18 meters in length. 18 meters, nearly 60 feet. That was impossible for any known living fish. Even the largest whale species rarely ventured to these depths. And this caldera was isolated from the open ocean. Whatever I was detecting had to be living here permanently. Recalibrating sonar array to verify readings, I said, my scientific skepticism kicking in. I ran a quick diagnostic on the system. All systems functioning within normal parameters. Readings appear accurate. I sat back in my seat, considering my options. The rational choice would be to continue my survey of the hydrothermal vents, collect the planned samples, and return to the surface with what I had already discovered. That alone would be enough to make scientific history. Investigating an unknown biological entity of that size carried obvious risks. And yet, what scientist could turn away from such a mystery? If there was an 18-meter organism living in this caldera, it would represent an even more significant discovery than the refugium itself. It could be an entirely unknown species, or perhaps a known species that had grown to unprecedented size in this isolated environment. Adjusting course to investigate biological signature, I decided, already guiding the submersible away from the hydrothermal vent, maintaining safe observation distance of 50 meters. As I navigated toward the location of the sonar contact, I kept a close eye on the display. The signature had moved again, now partially obscured by a large volcanic spire that rose from the caldera floor. I reduced speed, approaching cautiously. Unknown organism appears to be moving slowly along the western edge of the caldera, I reported. Estimated speed 1 to 2 knots. Behavior suggests possible foraging activity. I considered what it might be. A giant squid, perhaps? They were known to reach lengths of up to 13 meters, though typically in much shallower waters, or perhaps some kind of previously unknown fish species that had evolved in isolation. The possibilities were both exciting and unnerving, As I maneuvered around the volcanic spire, I prepared all available recording devices. Whatever I was about to see, I wanted to document it thoroughly. "Camera systems active on all available angles," I said, preparing to establish visual contact with unknown biological entity. The water ahead remained clear, with nothing immediately visible. I checked the sonar again. The contact was definitely there, now only 30 meters away and moving slowly in my direction. And then I saw it. "Oh my God," I whispered, forgetting scientific protocol entirely. Emerging from behind the volcanic spire was a shark, but not just any shark. Its size alone was staggering, but it was the distinctive body shape that made my blood run cold. The broad, flat snout, the massive triangular teeth visible even at this distance, the robust, torpedo-shaped body with the characteristic 5 gill slits. Visual confirmation of what appears to be, "This is impossible." "A living specimen of Otodus megalodon," I said, my voice barely steady. "Repeat, I am observing what appears to be a living megalodon shark, species believed extinct for approximately 3.6 million years." I couldn't believe what I was seeing, yet there it was. The creature was enormous, easily matching the sonar's 18-meter estimate, perhaps even exceeding it. Its body was a mottled gray-blue, perfectly adapted to the deep water environment. As it swam, its powerful tail propelled it with an effortless grace that belied its enormous size. I sat frozen in my seat, momentarily unable to do anything but stare. The megalodon, there was no doubt in my mind that's what it was, continued its steady path, apparently unaware of or uninterested in my presence. Then, as if sensing something new in its territory, the massive shark changed course slightly, turning toward the submersible. That broke my trance. I quickly reached for the controls, activating the craft's defensive measures. "Engaging electrical defense field," I reported, flipping the switch that sent a current through the submersible's outer hull. The system was designed to deter aggressive marine life by generating an electrical field that most predators found unpleasant. Whether it would have any effect on a prehistoric super predator was anyone's guess. The megalodon continued to approach, showing no signs of deterrence. Its eyes, dark, ancient eyes that had evolved to hunt in the dim light of deep water, seemed to fix directly on my submersible. "Subject approaching at slow speed," I said, forcing myself to maintain scientific observations despite my racing thoughts. No sign of aggression yet, but defensive posture noted in pectoral fin position. I checked the escape route options on my navigation display. The breach in the caldera wall was approximately 600 meters behind me, too far to reach quickly if needed. The submersible's top speed of 5 knots would be no match for the shark if it decided to pursue. The megalodon circled the submersible once, keeping a distance of about 15 meters. I rotated in my seat, tracking it through the viewports and on the external camera feeds. Now I could see details I'd missed in my initial shock. Along its right flank, the shark bore massive scars, 3 parallel lines that ran from just behind its gill slits almost to its pelvic fin. Subject displays extensive scarring on right lateral surface, I noted. Scar pattern suggests past encounter with another large predator, possibly another of its own species. I was capturing everything on video, documenting what would surely be considered one of the greatest zoological discoveries in history, if I made it back to share it. The shark completed its circle and began another, this time tightening its path to bring it closer to the submersible. Subject beginning second circling behavior, decreasing radius to approximately 10 meters from craft, I said. Behavior consistent with predatory assessment in extant shark species. I kept the electrical field at maximum power, hoping it would discourage the megalodon from coming any closer. The massive creature showed no obvious reaction to the electrical deterrent as it continued its circle, Was it curious, threatened, hungry? I had no way to know what might be going through the mind of a creature whose species had ruled the oceans for millions of years before disappearing from the fossil record. As the megalodon completed its second circle, it suddenly changed its behavior. Instead of continuing the circular pattern, it veered directly toward the submersible. I had just enough time to brace myself. Without warning, the megalodon rammed the submersible's side, throwing me against my restraints as warning lights flashed across the control panel. "Status report," I said aloud, still recording despite knowing no one could hear me. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. The pressure hull integrity indicator showed yellow, stressed, but not breached. That wouldn't last through another direct hit. I didn't have time to marvel at the scientific impossibility circling my craft. A living megalodon should have been impossible, yet here it was, over 60 feet of prehistoric apex predator, very real and very intent on crushing my submersible like the shell of a crab. My training took over. I reached for the emergency protocols panel and flipped open the protective cover. The caldera's rim was approximately 700 meters away, my only chance to escape this natural prison. I punched the emergency ascent sequence and felt the submersible lurch as the main thrusters fired at maximum capacity. "Initiating emergency ascent," I narrated for the log. Heading for the caldera breach at bearing 045. Megalodon still visible on exterior cameras. The submersible surged upward, angling toward the breach in the volcanic wall. Through the portside camera, I watched the megalodon. It should have reacted like most large sharks, startled by the sudden movement and noise of my thrusters. Instead, it adjusted its course with frightening precision, cutting through the water on an intercept trajectory. "Subject is displaying coordinated hunting behavior," I continued, my scientific mind still cataloging observations, even as my survival instinct screamed warnings. "It's anticipating the submersible's path, not simply reacting to stimulus. This contradicts all existing theories about prehistoric shark cognitive capabilities." The creature moved with terrifying efficiency, using its massive tail to propel its 18-meter body through the water faster than my struggling craft could manage. I increased power to the thrusters, watching the temperature gauges climb into the red zone. The submersible wasn't designed for sustained emergency maneuvers. Then the megalodon vanished from my camera views. "Visual contact lost," I reported, scanning all external feeds. "Sonar still tracking large biological signature, but..." The impact from below threw me against my harness with such force that I bit my tongue. The taste of blood filled my mouth as the submersible pitched violently upward, then slammed back down. Metal groaned as those ancient jaws scraped against the reinforced hull, testing for weaknesses like a predator trying to find the soft underbelly of its prey. Proximity alarms blared, adding to the chaos. The control panel flashed with new warnings, hull stress indicators shifting from yellow to orange in multiple sections. I fought with the manual controls, trying to stabilize our trajectory while keeping my focus on the breach ahead. "Maintaining course for caldera exit," I said between labored breaths. "Subject attacked from beneath. Classic ambush predator tactic. Pushing engines beyond safety parameters." The submersible's engines whined in protest as I demanded more power than they were designed to provide. The temperature gauges for the propulsion system had already maxed out, and warning messages flashed about imminent system failure. I ignored them. Better to burn out the engines reaching safety than preserve them and remain trapped. Through the forward cameras, I could see the breach growing larger. 700 meters had become 500. The megalodon appeared again, circling widely to my starboard side. I watched its movements on the monitor, recognizing something disturbing in its behavior. It wasn't simply chasing. It was studying us. Each time the submersible changed direction or speed, the The massive shark adjusted its approach. It was learning our capabilities, testing our responses. After millions of years of evolutionary refinement as the ocean's ultimate predator, this creature possessed an intelligence that no fossil record could have predicted. Subject appears to be analyzing submersible movement patterns, I narrated, demonstrating problem-solving behavior consistent with modern great whites, but with greater apparent sophistication. The megalodon completed its wide circle and disappeared from view again. I checked the sonar, seeing its massive signature accelerating directly toward my position. This time I was ready, throwing the submersible into a sharp dive, hoping to evade the attack. I miscalculated. The megalodon wasn't aiming for the main body of the craft. With terrifying precision, it clamped its massive jaws around the port thruster assembly. The impact sent the submersible into an uncontrolled spin. Warning alarms I'd never heard during training screamed through the cabin as the craft rotated wildly. "Port thruster compromised," I shouted over the cacophony of alarms, attempting to compensate with starboard thrust. My hands flew across the controls, trying to counteract the spin using the remaining functional thruster. The emergency stabilizers engaged automatically, but they weren't designed to handle this level of asymmetric thrust. The instrument panel became a sea of red as critical systems began to fail in cascade. The gyroscopic display showed we were spinning at nearly 40 degrees per second. My vision blurred as centrifugal forces pulled at my body. I managed to cut power to the port thruster assembly entirely, which slowed the rotation enough for the stabilizers to gradually bring us under control. When the spinning finally stopped, I took stock of our situation. The damage control schematic showed the port thruster unit nearly severed from the main body. It was hanging by its power conduits, dragging behind us like a wounded limb. The starboard thruster was functional but operating at only 60% capacity due to overheating. I ran the calculations in my head. With one thruster destroyed and the other compromised, we lacked the propulsion needed to reach the caldera entrance. The distance to the breach now seemed impossibly far. Escape through caldera entrance no longer viable, I stated flatly for the record. Insufficient thrust to reach exit point before complete propulsion failure. I needed to contact the surface. Even knowing it was futile, I reached for the emergency beacon controls. The submersible carried a powerful acoustic transmitter designed to penetrate thousands of meters of open water, but not solid volcanic rock. Still, protocol demanded I try. "Activating emergency beacon," I announced, transmitting distress signal and coordinates. I engaged the system, watching the status indicator cycle through its startup sequence. The small hope that some fragment of signal might find its way through a fissure in the caldera wall was better than no hope at all. Perhaps the acoustic signature would propagate through the breach, however attenuated, and reach the oceanic pioneer. The sonar pinged a warning. The megalodon was approaching again, this time more slowly. Its massive form appeared on the external cameras, circling at a distance of about 20 meters. The creature's gills pulsed as it studied the crippled submersible. Even in my dire situation, I couldn't help but marvel at the prehistoric hunter. Its scarred hide told stories of battles with other massive creatures in this hidden ecosystem, a world untouched by human observation until now. "Subject is approaching for another attack run," I narrated. "Submersible defenses minimal. Standard submersible defensive measures were limited to bright lights and some electrical deterrent fields, neither likely to dissuade a 60-foot prehistoric shark." As the creature began another approach, I frantically searched the control panel for any option I'd overlooked. My fingers brushed against a red switch cover near the auxiliary controls, one that hadn't been in the original submersible design. The label read, "Blackwood Defense System, Emergency Use Only. Kevin." Of course. Kevin Blackwood had been my research assistant 2 years earlier, before leaving to start his own marine technology firm. Brilliant but unpredictable, he'd insisted on installing a few upgrades to the Abyssal Explorer during its last refit. I'd forgotten about the defensive system he'd added, something the University Review Board hadn't officially approved. "You never know what's down there, Doc," he told me with that characteristic grin. "Better to have options and not need them." The megalodon accelerated, its enormous mouth beginning to open as it closed the distance. I flipped the cover and pressed the switch. A series of mechanical thuds resonated through the hull as pressurized titanium spikes extended from strategic points around the submersible's exterior. I watched through the cameras as the foot-long spikes deployed fully, transforming the smooth contours of the Explorer into a bristling sea urchin. The megalodon, committed to its attack run, couldn't adjust in time. It veered at the last second, but several spikes scraped along its underside as it passed. The creature pulled away sharply, its massive tail thrashing in what appeared to be pain or surprise. "Blackwood defensive system deployed," I reported. "Subject temporarily deterred." The massive shark circled at a wider distance now, clearly reassessing this new development. The defensive spikes had bought me precious seconds, but they weren't a permanent solution. Eventually, the megalodon would adapt its attack strategy or simply wear down the submersible's remaining systems. I used this temporary reprieve to fully assess our situation. The damage control screen showed multiple systems in critical condition. The port thruster was completely non-functional, while the starboard thruster was operating at less than 60% and continuing to degrade. Hull integrity remained compromised, but stable, with several sections showing stress fractures that hadn't yet breached the pressure hull. Life support was intact, with approximately 72 hours of air remaining at current consumption rates. Power reserves were at 83%, but with the ongoing drain from emergency systems and the remaining thruster, that would deplete rapidly. I examined the topographic display of the caldera, searching for options. The main exit was unreachable with our current propulsion capabilities, but perhaps there were alternative escape routes, underwater tunnels or fissures that might connect to the outside. The sonar mapping revealed several promising features along the northeastern wall, a series of narrow crevices that might lead to connecting chambers or tunnels. They weren't ideal, tight spaces that would challenge the submersible's maneuverability, but they represented potential escape routes that wouldn't require the full thrust needed to reach the main breach. As I plotted potential courses to these crevices, I kept one eye on the external cameras. The megalodon continued to circle, staying just beyond the range of clear visibility. Its behavior suggested it wasn't leaving, just reconsidering its approach. "Beginning damage mitigation procedures," I said, working through the emergency protocols. "Rerouting power from non-essential systems to maintain critical functions. Plotting alternative escape routes through northeastern wall features." I shut down several research systems and diverted their power to propulsion and life support. Every % of energy efficiency mattered now. The temporary reprieve provided by Kevin's defense system had given me the chance to think clearly, to move from reactive panic to strategic planning. The possibility of rescue seemed remote. Even if some trace of my emergency signal reached the surface, the Oceanic Pioneer wasn't equipped for deep rescue operations. They would need to call in specialized equipment, a process that would take days, far longer than my remaining air supply would last. Self-rescue was my only realistic option. I needed to find a way out of this caldera, evade the megalodon, and reach a depth where communication with the surface became possible again. As I worked through these calculations, I glanced at the external temperature readings. The water near the hydrothermal vents registered significantly higher temperatures, up to 20 degrees Celsius in some spots. An idea began to form. Most sharks, including great whites, were sensitive to temperature gradients. If the megalodon shared this trait with its modern relatives, The hot water near the vents might provide a natural barrier it would be reluctant to cross. My theory about the thermal barrier died the moment I saw movement on the external camera feeds. The megalodon was back, and this time, its approach looked different, more purposeful, more determined. The temporary reprieve had lasted less than a minute. "It's circling tighter," I said aloud, my voice recording automatically into the submersible's black box. "Coming in at approximately 30 meters and closing fast. Speed, I'd estimate 6 knots. Faster than before." The creature's massive silhouette cut through the illuminated water with startling precision. I watched its muscular body flex as it banked sharply, changing direction without slowing. This wasn't the exploratory behavior it had shown earlier. This was something else entirely. I gripped the manual control stick, ready to attempt evasive action with what little maneuverability I had left. The diagnostic panel showed the starboard thruster straining to compensate for the damaged port side. If I pushed it any harder, I'd risk losing all propulsion capability. "Coming in from bearing 205, I narrated, tracking the shark as it disappeared beneath the submersible. The sonar pinged frantically, warning of the rapid approach. "Impact imminent." The collision hit with such force that my teeth slammed together, narrowly missing my tongue. The entire submersible jerked upward, then listed to port as systems struggled to maintain equilibrium. Warning lights pulsed across the console. More red than yellow now. "Direct hit to the undercarriage," I reported, scanning the damage readouts. "Hull integrity holding, but additional stress fractures detected in sections C and D." I barely had time to finish the sentence before the megalodon struck again, this time from the starboard side. The attack was precisely targeted, not random aggression, but a calculated assault. The impact sent me slamming against my harness, knocking the wind from my lungs. A new alarm joined the cacophony, high-pitched and urgent. My eyes darted to the life support panel where a digital countdown had activated, showing 0600 and ticking downward. "Life support compromised," I said between ragged breaths. "Oxygen recycling system damaged. 6 hours of breathable air remaining." This changed everything. My previous assessment of 72 hours had assumed intact life support systems. Now, survival wasn't a matter of days, but hours. The megalodon circled back into view, blood streaking from several wounds where Blackwood's defensive spikes had punctured its thick hide. These injuries clearly hadn't deterred it. If anything, they seemed to have provoked a more aggressive response. The creature disappeared again, and I braced for another impact. It came from directly above, a thunderous blow that sent vibrations through the entire pressure hull. I heard a metallic groan as the reinforced titanium strained against forces it was never designed to withstand. "Third impact. Vertical vector," I said mechanically, clinging to the protocols that kept panic at bay. "Outer sensor array likely compromised." As if confirming my assessment, 3 of the external camera feeds went dark simultaneously. I was now blind to anything happening above or behind the submersible. Between attacks, I worked feverishly, rerouting power and trying to stabilize the sinking craft. My fingers flew across the emergency systems panel, bypassing safety protocols to access reserve energy cells. "Attempting to establish communication with surface," I said, activating the backup acoustic transmitter. Unlike the standard communication array, this system used low-frequency sound waves that could potentially penetrate the caldera walls. It wasn't designed for two-way communication, but could send automated distress pulses. The system hummed to life, and I watched the signal strength indicator with desperate hope. It flickered weakly, 1 bar, then 2, before settling back to 1. Not strong, but possibly enough to be detected by the surface ship's listening arrays. Something caught my attention on the sensor panel, a faint return signal pinging at regular intervals. "Wait," I muttered, adjusting the gain on the receiver. "I'm picking up an automated response pattern." Standard rescue protocol. I felt a surge of hope as I decoded the signal pattern. The Oceanic Pioneer had registered the submersible's emergency beacon's absence and initiated rescue procedures. According to the coded pulses, they had already deployed an automated rescue drone to my last known coordinates. The brief spark of hope was immediately tempered by the reality of my situation. The drone would be coming from the surface, over 8 kilometers above. Even traveling at its maximum descent rate, it would take hours to reach the caldera, assuming it could even locate the narrow entrance breach. Rescue drone estimated arrival. I calculated quickly, factoring in descent rates and search patterns. Minimum of 5 hours, assuming optimal navigation. That's cutting it too close with current life support limitations. The Megalodon struck again, this time hitting precisely where it had impacted earlier. The hull integrity alarm blared, a sound I'd hoped never to hear in my career. The digital readout shifted from orange to red, displaying critical next to sections C and D. Hull breach imminent in section C, I reported, my voice steady despite the ice-cold fear gripping my chest. The Megalodon is deliberately targeting structural weaknesses. It's learning. This realization chilled me more than the failing environmental controls ever could. I'd studied predator behavior extensively throughout my career, but this level of tactical thinking suggested cognition far beyond what any modern shark species had demonstrated. The Megalodon wasn't just attacking randomly. It was systematically testing the submersible's vulnerabilities and then exploiting them. I watched through the remaining camera feeds as the massive predator circled back, its scarred flank now facing the submersible as it lined up for another pass. Its trajectory aligned perfectly with the previously impacted areas. Not coincidence, strategy. Subject continues to target the same structural weak points, I said for the record. This indicates either remarkable pattern recognition or genuine problem-solving intelligence. Either way, it's demonstrating behavior completely inconsistent with known shark species. The fifth impact hit with such precision that I knew immediately something critical had failed. The harsh sound of metal buckling was followed by multiple system failures across my control panel. Primary power coupling severed, I reported, as the main lights flickered and dimmed. Switching to emergency power. The emergency lighting cast an eerie red glow throughout the cabin. Outside, the external lights dimmed by half, reducing visibility significantly. I felt the submersible losing buoyancy control, beginning a slow but inexorable descent toward the caldera floor. Submersible losing depth control, I stated, fighting the manual control stick that had suddenly gone sluggish in my hands. Estimated descent rate of 2 meters per minute. At this rate, we'll hit the caldera floor in approximately 20 minutes. I glanced at the life support timer. 5:43:12. The hull integrity warning continued to flash, and I knew the Megalodon would strike again soon. If I did nothing, I'd either suffocate, be crushed by pressure if the hull failed, or be torn apart by the prehistoric predator circling outside. None of those options appealed to me. Initiating emergency maneuver protocol, I said, accessing the submersible's auxiliary power reserves, diverting all non-essential power to maneuvering thrusters. The lights dimmed further as I rerouted power, leaving only the instrument panels and minimal emergency lighting functional. The life support timer continued its countdown, unaffected by my power adjustments. I'd been careful not to compromise what little oxygen processing capacity remained. With the additional power, I felt the control stick respond more readily. We weren't fast, but at least I could steer. The depth gauge showed we were still sinking, but I could now direct our descent rather than fall helplessly. On the thermal imaging display, I could see the heat signatures of the hydrothermal vent field, about 100 meters to the northwest. The water temperature there spiked dramatically, creating natural thermal barriers that many deep-sea creatures avoided. It was a long shot, but still my best chance at protection. Altering course to intercept hydrothermal vent field, I reported, maintaining minimal forward thrust to conserve power while using descent momentum to reach target. I manipulated the controls carefully, balancing our descent rate against forward movement. The submersible responded sluggishly but obeyed, gradually turning toward the vents. On the sonar, I could see the megalodon adjusting its course to follow. "Subject is maintaining pursuit," I said, "currently a distance of 50 meters and closing, continuing on course to thermal barrier." As we neared the vent field, the external temperature sensors registered dramatic changes. The ambient water temperature rose from 5.7 to 8.3, then 12.6, and continued climbing as we approached the active vents. "External water temperature now 15 degrees Celsius and rising," I reported. "That's nearly 12 degrees above the caldera baseline. If the megalodon shares thermal sensitivity with modern shark species, this should create a natural deterrent." I guided the damaged submersible into the heart of the vent field, where massive black smokers billowed superheated water into the surrounding sea. The external temperature readout climbed past 20 degrees near some vents, creating visible thermal distortion on the camera feeds. "We've reached the primary vent field," I said. "External temperature at the nearest vent measures 24.6 degrees Celsius, positioning submersible within the thermal plume for maximum protection." I held my breath, watching the sonar display intently. The megalodon's signature slowed its approach as it reached the outer edges of the temperature gradient. For a moment, just a moment, I allowed myself to hope. That hope vanished when the sonar showed the creature resuming its advance, cutting straight through the thermal barrier without hesitation. "Subject appears completely undeterred by temperature change," I reported, my voice finally betraying a hint of the desperation I felt. "It's crossing through water that's 15 degrees warmer than ambient, without any sign of discomfort or avoidance behavior." I watched in disbelief as the megalodon swam directly between two black smokers, passing through water that registered nearly 25 degrees Celsius. Modern great whites would never tolerate such a dramatic temperature shift. This prehistoric creature apparently operated under different rules. "The thermal barrier strategy has failed," I stated flatly. "Subject is demonstrating environmental adaptability far exceeding modern shark species." The megalodon emerged from between the vents, less than 30 meters from the submersible now. In the dim emergency lighting, I could see its massive jaws opening and closing, as if testing the water. The defensive spikes protruding from the submersible's hull hadn't deterred it. The thermal vents hadn't stopped it. My scientific mind couldn't help but marvel at the creature's adaptability, even as my survival instinct screamed warnings. "It appears this specimen has evolved to function across a much wider temperature range than its modern relatives," I observed, watching it draw closer. "Possibly an adaptation to the varied environments of the late Miocene period, or perhaps a specific adaptation to hydrothermal environments." The megalodon circled the submersible, seemingly untroubled by the hot water. It moved with deliberate purpose, studying the damaged craft from multiple angles. I checked the life support timer. 5:26:37. The rescue drone was still hours away. "I'm running out of options," I admitted, both to the recorder and to myself. "Subject has negated both defensive measures available to the submersible. The hydrothermal vents provide no protection." I scanned the camera feeds, searching for any possible escape route or defensive position. The caldera wall was too far to reach with our damaged propulsion. The floor offered no shelter. Even if I could somehow exit the submersible in my emergency diving gear, I'd be even more vulnerable to the predator. The megalodon approached again, this time with measured patience. It stopped just outside the range of the remaining defensive spikes, hovering in the hot water with apparent comfort. Then it began to circle, gradually decreasing the radius with each pass. Hunting behavior, wearing down its prey. Subject is exhibiting classic predatory containment strategy, I said. It's corralling the submersible, limiting escape options while conserving energy. The life support timer continued its merciless countdown. 5, 24, 11. I've made a critical error in assuming this creature would share the same environmental limitations as modern sharks, I acknowledged. The megalodon is completely undeterred by the temperature change, leaving me with significantly fewer options for survival. I watched the prehistoric predator through the remaining camera feed, a mixture of scientific fascination and primal fear coursing through me. It was beautiful in its terrible efficiency, a perfect predator that time had forgotten. And now it had me trapped in a failing metal box at the bottom of the world. I maneuvered the damaged submersible toward the largest black smoker chimney, hoping its massive structure might offer some protection. The towering hydrothermal vent stood like a natural fortress, its 15-meter height and 3-meter width creating a potential shield against the megalodon. The craft responded sluggishly to my controls as I eased us behind the sulfide-encrusted formation, the starboard thruster working overtime to compensate for the damaged port side. Positioning Abyssal Explorer behind primary vent structure, I said into the recorder, keeping my voice steady despite the situation. Current depth 9,300 meters. External temperature at vent proximity 12 degrees Celsius. I checked the structural integrity display, noting the orange warnings still flashing across sections C and D. The submersible wouldn't survive another direct impact. My breathing sounded unnaturally loud in the confined space. I wiped sweat from my forehead with the back of my hand. The temperature inside the cabin had risen by 2 degrees since we entered the vent field. Not dangerous yet, but an unwelcome trend. The environmental controls were working harder to compensate for the external heat, draining precious power from other systems. My thoughts turned to the surface team. Had they received my distress signal? The automated response from the Oceanic Pioneer confirmed they'd deployed a rescue drone, but I had no way to know if it was actually en route or if it had encountered problems of its own. 5 hours until potential rescue. With just over 5 hours of life support remaining, it would be cutting it extremely close, even without a prehistoric apex predator hunting me. I leaned forward, studying the sonar display. The megalodon's signature appeared as a massive blob circling the vent field. Its pattern seemed deliberate, testing different angles of approach while keeping its distance from the superheated water jetting from the vent's main chimney. This behavior contradicts everything we know about extinct megafauna, I said, narrating my observations. The creature displays problem-solving capabilities well beyond what the fossil record suggested for Otodus megalodon. Current theories about prehistoric shark intelligence need significant revision. Even in this dire situation, the scientist in me couldn't help documenting the extraordinary behavior. If I survived, this footage would revolutionize our understanding of extinct marine predators. 10 minutes passed in tense silence as I monitored the shark's movements. It maintained its circular patrol, occasionally tightening its loop before widening it again. The pattern reminded me of how modern sharks test electric barriers, probing for weaknesses without committing to a full attack. I checked the defense system status. Blackwood's titanium spikes had deployed successfully during the earlier attack, but the mechanism was designed for a single use. The empty indicator light confirmed what I already knew. I had no more external defenses. The life support timer now read 5:08:22. I took a deep breath, trying to slow my heart rate to conserve oxygen. Eliza's words from before the dive came back to me. The caldera's hydrothermal environment is inherently unstable. Any disruption could trigger unpredictable changes in temperature or mineral precipitation. At the time, I'd dismissed her concerns as excessive caution. Now, trapped in a failing submersible with a prehistoric predator circling outside, her warning felt prophetic. The sonar pinged a warning. The megalodon was changing its pattern, tightening its circle to 20 meters. "Subject is altering its approach pattern," I reported, keeping my voice clinical despite the fear tightening my chest. "Reducing distance to approximately 20 meters. Behavior consistent with final assessment before attack." I gripped the control stick, readying myself to attempt evasive maneuvers despite knowing how limited my options were. The starboard thruster was already working beyond its design parameters. Another sudden strain might cause it to fail completely. The megalodon disappeared from my remaining camera feeds. I checked the sonar again, noting its position directly above the submersible. Visual contact lost. Sonar indicates target is... The impact came from above with stunning force, driving the submersible downward and throwing me against my harness. Warning lights flashed across the control panel as the craft tilted dangerously toward the main thermal vent. "Taking evasive action," I called out, fighting with the controls. The submersible responded with agonizing slowness, the damaged thrusters struggling to move us away from the vent's superheated plume. Attempting to stabilize position. The external temperature gauge began climbing rapidly. 15 degrees, 18 degrees, 22 degrees. The black smoker vent directly behind us spewed water that reached temperatures of over 300 degrees Celsius. If we drifted too close to its main plume, the submersible's external systems would begin to fail. I managed to stabilize our position about 8 meters from the vent's main plume, but the megalodon wasn't finished. It circled back around, its massive form appearing on my port camera feed. "Target returning on port side," I reported, sweat running into my eyes. I blinked it away, keeping my focus on the controls, preparing for secondary impact. The shark struck again, this time hitting the submersible's rear section with precision. The impact pushed us sideways, sliding us 3 meters closer to the main vent plume. The external temperature gauge jumped to 28 degrees. "Craft position compromised," I said, my voice tight as I fought with the increasingly unresponsive controls. "Distance to main thermal plume approximately 5 meters and decreasing." A new alarm sounded, the viewport integrity warning. I looked up from the controls to see fine lines beginning to form along the acrylic dome. The extreme temperature differential between the superheated water outside and the climate-controlled interior was creating stress in the material. "Viewport showing early signs of structural stress," I reported, unable to keep the tension from my voice. "Temperature differential exceeding design parameters." I diverted additional power to the starboard thruster, trying to pull us away from the vent. The engine whined in protest, pushing the submersible a mere meter before the power levels dropped into the red zone. Engine overheating. Forced to reduce power to prevent complete thruster failure. The megalodon appeared on my remaining functional camera, circling at a distance of 15 meters. It was watching, waiting. With horrible clarity, I realized what was happening. It was deliberately pushing me toward the vent. Whether by instinct or intelligence, it had figured out that the superheated water would eventually compromise my vessel. "The megalodon appears to be employing a strategy to force the submersible into the main thermal plume," I said, recording my observation for whatever scientific value it might have. "This suggests environmental manipulation far beyond the cognitive abilities previously attributed to prehistoric sharks." I watched as the creature circled once more, then charged again. This time I braced for the impact, but it still sent the submersible sliding another meter toward the vent. The external temperature now read 34 degrees Celsius. More fracture lines appeared across the viewport, creating a web-like pattern in the thick acrylic. The life support timer read 4:52:36, but I knew that wouldn't matter if the viewport failed. Complete structural collapse would be instantaneous at this depth. I scanned the systems panel, looking for anything that might help. Most of the external scientific equipment was either damaged or would be useless against a 60-foot prehistoric shark. The sampling arms lacked the strength to cause any meaningful damage, and the external lights were already at maximum brightness. Then my eyes landed on the geological coring drill status indicator. The light showed green, fully operational. The drill was designed to extract rock samples from the ocean floor with a diamond-tipped bit capable of penetrating even the hardest basaltic formations. It wasn't designed as a weapon, but it was the only functioning system with enough power to potentially make a difference. The megalodon circled back, preparing for another strike. I had seconds to act. I activated the drill control panel, extending the mechanical arm from its housing on the submersible's underside. The arm deployed smoothly, the drill bit glinting in the external lights. But I didn't aim it at the shark. Activating geological coring drill, I reported. Target: primary black smoker chimney structural base. The idea had come from Eliza's warnings about the unstable hydrothermal environment. The black smoker chimneys were essentially mineral deposits built up over centuries of superheated water, precipitating dissolved metals. Their structures were ancient, but potentially fragile, especially at the base where thermal stress was greatest. The megalodon was charging again, its massive form growing larger in the camera feed. I pushed the drill arm to maximum extension, aiming not at the approaching predator, but at the base of the black smoker chimney we were backed against. Initiating drilling sequence now. The diamond bit made contact with the mineral formation and began to spin, sending vibrations through the water. The drill penetrated the ancient structure with surprising ease, boring into the accumulated layers of mineral deposits. Fragments broke away, creating a cloud of particulate matter that partially obscured the camera view. The megalodon was less than 10 meters away when the vibrations intensified. The drill bit had reached a point of structural weakness in the chimney, and cracks began spreading outward from the contact point. The massive shark hesitated, veering away from its attack trajectory as the vibrations grew stronger. I increased the drill's rotation speed to maximum, pushing it deeper into the chimney's base. More cracks appeared, spreading upward along the structure's 15-meter height. Structural integrity of the vent chimney is compromising, I reported, watching as the megalodon circled wider, clearly disturbed by the intense vibrations traveling through the water. The low-frequency vibrations appeared to be triggering an avoidance response in the predator. The shark moved farther away, maintaining a distance of at least 30 meters now. I kept the drill running, focusing on widening the crack at the chimney's base. If I could cause enough structural damage, the resulting collapse might create an even larger disturbance, possibly enough to drive the megalodon away long enough for me to find a better position. The high-powered drill penetrated deeper into the ancient structure, sending vibrations through the water that temporarily drove away the megalodon. I kept my focus on the structural weak point I'd identified, a narrow section about 4 meters up from the base where mineral deposits had created a natural bottleneck. The drill bit ground against the crystallized minerals, and I could feel the vibrations through the submersible's frame. A quick glance at the life support timer made my stomach tight. 3.13 and counting down. 3 hours of breathable air left. My chances of survival were shrinking with every passing minute. Still recording, I said to the empty cabin, my voice steady despite everything. Current depth 9,280 meters. External temperature near vent is reading 34 degrees Celsius. continuing targeted structural compromise of the primary black smoker chimney. I wiped sweat from my forehead with my sleeve. The cabin temperature had risen another degree, a result of the overtaxed cooling systems and our proximity to the hydrothermal vent. The damaged port thruster wasn't just making navigation difficult. The electrical systems tied to it were pulling power from environmental controls. On the sonar display, I tracked the megalodon. It maintained a cautious distance of about 45 meters, circling the perimeter of the vent field. The vibrations from the drill seemed to keep it at bay, but I couldn't count on that lasting. "Subject continues to maintain distance but hasn't abandoned the area," I narrated, displaying what appears to be patience, further evidence of advanced cognitive capabilities beyond what we'd expect from extinct macropredators. My scientific mind kept working even as I fought for my life. If I somehow survived this, the data would be invaluable. If not, maybe the recordings would be recovered eventually. The drill bit suddenly lurched forward as it broke through a section of weaker material. The console lit up with a proximity warning. I'd gotten too close to the vent structure. Quickly, I pulled back slightly, adjusting the angle to continue working on the same structural weakness. "Contact with less mineralized section," I reported. "Structural integrity of chimney showing signs of compromise." I zoomed in the external camera to examine my progress. Hairline fractures had begun to spread from the drill site, spiderwebbing across the chimney's surface. Each new crack caught the submersible's lights, reflecting in crystalline patterns. The structure was beginning to fail exactly as I'd hoped. The biggest risk now was positioning. When the chimney collapsed, I needed to be clear of the debris and the superheated water that would burst free. At the same time, I wanted the megalodon caught in the chaos. I checked my instruments again. The structural integrity of sections C and D of the submersible still showed orange warnings, but they hadn't worsened. The starboard thruster was operating at 58% capacity now, slightly worse than before, but still functional. A low groan emanated from the chimney, audible even through the submersible's hull. The fractures were spreading faster now, racing up and down the structure's length. "Imminent structural failure," I said. Beginning evasive maneuvers. I disengaged the drill and retracted it into its housing. With my left hand, I grabbed the manual control stick and began redirecting every spare watt of power to the starboard maneuvering thruster. The control panel beeped in protest as I pushed it beyond recommended parameters. "Diverting power from non-essential systems to starboard thruster," I narrated. "Rerouting from external lighting, reducing cabin heating, and limiting sensor array power draw." The cabin lights dimmed as power shifted to the thrusters. I kept only the minimal external lights I needed to see where I was going. My right hand flew across the touchscreen, confirming the power redistribution. The starboard thruster gauge climbed to 63%, not great, but it would have to do. I pulled back on the control stick, angling the submersible away from the chimney. The response was sluggish, but the craft began to move. The damaged port side made maneuvering feel like steering a car with a flat tire, but I managed to put about 15 meters between us and the failing structure. The groan from the chimney grew louder, more insistent. On camera, I could see the fractures widening, small pieces breaking away as the internal pressure found new escape routes. "Chimney collapse imminent," I said. "Current distance from structure, 15 meters and increasing." The sonar pinged with movement. The megalodon was on the move again, swimming closer as the vibrations from the drill ceased. It had closed to 30 meters now, resuming its hunting pattern. "Subject approaching from bearing 180, I noted. "Speed approximately 4 knots. I needed the timing to be perfect. Too soon, and the shark would avoid the collapse entirely. Too late, and I'd be caught in it myself. The first major chunk broke free from the chimney, followed quickly by a second. Superheated water began to spray from the new openings, creating chaotic currents that buffeted the submersible. I gripped the control stick tighter, fighting to maintain position. Then it happened all at once. The central section of the chimney gave way completely, collapsing inward before being blown outward by the pressure behind it. The structure toppled with the force of a small underwater avalanche, mineral formations that had taken centuries to form disintegrating in seconds. A massive cloud of superheated water, minerals, and debris exploded outward in all directions, carrying with it a thunderous underwater rumble that vibrated through the submersible's hull. "Chimney collapse complete," I reported, my voice nearly drowned out by the noise. "Massive thermal and particulate discharge." The cloud expanded rapidly, engulfing everything in its path. Through the murk, I caught a glimpse of the megalodon as the superheated plume hit it directly. The creature thrashed violently, clearly disoriented by the sudden temperature change and loss of visibility. This was my chance. I pushed the control stick forward, angling the submersible away from the collapsed vent and toward the caldera wall. Earlier during my descent, I'd noticed a narrow fissure in the northeastern section, a potential escape route if I could reach it. Now it represented my best chance at survival. "Executing emergency extraction plan," I said, straining to keep my voice level. "Setting course for northeastern caldera wall feature, bearing 042. The submersible moved with agonizing slowness. The starboard thruster strained to compensate for the dead port side, causing the craft to pull slightly right with each burst of power. I constantly adjusted the heading, fighting against the natural tendency to drift off course. Behind me, the cloud continued to expand, obscuring everything in a swirling mix of minerals and superheated water. The external temperature gauge climbed rapidly as we passed through the outer edge of the plume. 42 degrees, 45, 48. The hull creaked under the thermal stress, and new warning indicators flashed across my display. "Experiencing significant thermal gradient," I noted. "Hull temperature differential exceeding recommended parameters." I kept pushing forward, using the cloud as cover. The sonar showed chaotic readings as the particulate matter interfered with the acoustic signals. The megalodon was lost somewhere in the murk, hopefully still disoriented by the catastrophic environmental change. As I cleared the edge of the expanding plume, I adjusted course again, making directly for the fissure. It was becoming visible now in the external camera, a jagged crack in the caldera wall, perhaps 4 meters wide at its widest point. The Abyssal Explorer was just under 4 meters at its widest cross-section. It would be tight. "Approaching northeastern fissure," I reported. "Width appears marginally sufficient for submersible passage." I reduced power to the thrusters as I neared the opening, wanting precise control for the delicate maneuver. The fissure loomed larger in my viewports, a dark gash in the volcanic rock that might lead to freedom or become my tomb. As I guided the submersible into the narrow opening, the external proximity alarms began to sound. The rock walls were mere centimeters from the hull on either side. I cut power to the thrusters entirely, letting momentum carry us forward, while I made tiny adjustments with the maneuvering jets. "Entering fissure," I said. "Clearance minimal on both port and starboard sides." The scrape of rock against metal sent shudders through the submersible. I winced at each contact, picturing the paint being stripped away, hoping the hull wouldn't be compromised. The passage narrowed further as I progressed, forcing me to angle the submersible slightly to squeeze through the tightest sections. "Hull contact with rock formations," I reported as another jarring scrape reverberated through the cabin. "Structural integrity holding." The fissure twisted and turned, following the natural fractures in the volcanic rock. Navigation was a constant challenge, with each turn requiring careful calculation and precise control. Several times I had to stop completely, assess the path ahead, and then inch forward with minimal power. After what felt like an eternity but was likely only minutes, the passage began to widen. The proximity alarms quieted, and I allowed myself a small breath of relief. Passage widening, I noted, clearing minimum clearance threshold. I activated the forward-looking sonar to map what lay ahead. The signal bounced back, painting a picture of a secondary chamber beyond the fissure, a natural cavity in the volcanic structure, roughly spherical and approximately 200 meters across. Detecting large cavern ahead, I reported, feeling a surge of hope for the first time in hours. Appears to be a secondary magma chamber, now water-filled. As the submersible emerged from the fissure into the open space of the chamber, I finally had room to maneuver again. I brought the craft to a relative stop and performed a full 360-degree scan with all operational sensors. The chamber was even more impressive than the initial readings suggested. Its walls were smooth in places, rippled in others, the telltale signs of ancient magma flows now cooled and hardened. Several smaller vents dotted the floor, releasing minor plumes of heated water, but nothing like the massive black smokers in the main caldera. Most importantly, I detected another passage on the far side, larger than the fissure I'd just navigated, leading outward toward open ocean. Secondary chamber contains apparent exit passage, I said, my voice tight with controlled excitement. Bearing 273, width approximately 6 meters, well within navigational parameters. But before I could plot a course to this promising escape route, I needed to check what was happening behind me. I redirected the sonar back toward the fissure we'd just traversed, scanning for any sign of pursuit. The readings painted a clear picture. The megalodon was circling the collapsed vent, still visible despite the cloud of debris and superheated water. Its movement pattern was erratic, suggesting confusion or disorientation. It swept back and forth across the side of the collapsed chimney, occasionally making short darts in random directions before returning to its circling. Subject remains in main caldera, I reported, relief evident in my voice despite my attempt at clinical detachment. Behavior suggests temporary disorientation due to environmental disruption and sensory overload. Currently, no indication of pursuit through the fissure. The plan had worked better than I could have hoped. The combination of the collapsing chimney, the superheated water plume, and the narrow escape route had given me a crucial advantage. Now I needed to capitalize on it before the creature regained its bearings or detected my new position. I checked the life support timer, 2:41:18. Less than 3 hours of breathable air remained. If the passage ahead led to open ocean as I hoped, I might still have a chance of rescue, but only if the surface team knew where to find me. Initiating power redistribution, I said, fingers flying across the control panel. Diverting all non-essential power to emergency locator beacon. The cabin lights dimmed further as I shunted power away from them. I shut down the external sample collection system, disabled the automatic data logging functions, and reduced the environmental controls to minimum levels. Every watt I could spare went to the emergency beacon. The signal strength indicator on the communications panel rose from 23% to 68%. Without the massive bulk of the caldera's main walls blocking the transmission, the beacon's signal had a much better chance of reaching the surface. Emergency locator signal strength now at 68%, I reported. Transmitting position, depth, and critical system status on all emergency frequencies. I allowed myself a moment to picture the scene on the surface. Miranda would be coordinating the rescue effort from the Oceanic Pioneer. Eliza would be there too, probably demanding to pilot the rescue submersible herself. Captain Vasquez would be keeping the research vessel positioned optimally despite the rough seas. They were looking for me. I just needed to stay alive long enough to be found. I set a course for the exit passage, applying gentle power to the starboard thruster. The submersible moved forward smoothly, crossing the secondary chamber at a conservative pace to conserve power. As I approached the passage, I conducted another sonar sweep, confirming that it did indeed lead toward open ocean. The geological formation suggested this was a secondary lava tube formed when the volcano was active millions of years ago. Proceeding through exit passage, I narrated. Sonar indicates path to open ocean approximately 300 meters in length, with no significant obstructions. The passage was considerably wider than the fissure I'd navigated earlier, allowing me to maintain a safe distance from the walls on either side. Still, I proceeded cautiously, aware that any further damage to the submersible could be catastrophic. As I progressed through the lava tube, the emergency beacon continued to transmit, sending out its electronic cry for help. Each ping represented another chance that someone would hear it, that they would come looking for me in the right place, rather than the caldera where I'd originally descended. Continuing transmission on emergency frequency, I said. Position updates automatically included in signal. Current depth, 9,140 meters. The life support timer ticked down relentlessly, 238.04, 238.03, 238.02. I diverted my remaining power to the emergency locator beacon, strengthening its signal now that the thick caldera walls no longer blocked the transmission, hoping someone would detect my location before my oxygen ran out completely. Abyssal Explorer to Oceanic Pioneer. Emergency extraction required. Submersible critically damaged. Position transmitted via emergency beacon. Please respond. I released the transmit button and waited, listening to the hollow static that filled the communication channel. No response. I checked the life support timer, 2:32:41. The submersible had stabilized somewhat, and I was now positioned just inside the exit passage, maintaining minimal power usage to extend my remaining oxygen supply. Abyssal Explorer to Oceanic Pioneer. Current depth 9,130 meters. Hull integrity compromised in multiple sections. Life support failing. Request immediate extraction. Please acknowledge. More static. I adjusted the gain on the receiver, hoping to catch even the faintest reply. Nothing but the soft hiss of an empty channel. I wiped sweat from my forehead with my sleeve. The cabin was hot as the environmental system struggled with reduced power. My shirt stuck to my back, and the air tasted stale from overtaxed scrubbers. Oceanic Pioneer, this is Abyssal Explorer. If you're receiving this transmission, please respond. Situation critical. I leaned back in the pilot's seat, my muscles aching from tension. The submersible creaked around me, the pressure of over 9,000 meters of water seeking every weakness in the damaged hull. Section C showed orange warning indicators, with stress fractures slowly expanding. Section D wasn't far behind. The sonar display showed nothing but the rocky contours of the passage I'd found. No sign of the megalodon. I'd been monitoring it religiously, sweeping a full 360 degrees every 30 seconds. The massive predator remained in the main caldera, likely still disoriented from the collapse of the hydrothermal vent. But I knew better than to assume safety. I checked the signal strength of the emergency beacon, 72%. I'd managed to boost it by rerouting power from the remaining external lights, and all but one camera. The beacon transmitted not just a simple distress call, but also my precise coordinates, depth, and basic telemetry data. If the Oceanic Pioneer was still above, they would know exactly where I was, if they were still above. 12 minutes had passed since my first transmission. I thumbed the transmit button again. Abyssal Explorer to Oceanic Pioneer. Miranda, Lenora, anyone please respond. Systems failing. Life support countdown at 2 hours 20 minutes. I reached for my water bottle, taking a small sip. I'd been rationing it, unsure how long I might be trapped. The warm liquid barely soothed my dry throat. The data storage unit hummed to my right. It held high-definition video of the megalodon, water samples from hydrothermal vents, sonar maps of the caldera, and biological surveys of the unique ecosystem. Proof of a living prehistoric predator that had survived in this deep-sea refuge for millions of years. A discovery that could change marine biology if I survived to share it. 20 minutes now. Still no response. This is Abyssal Explorer calling Oceanic Pioneer. Please acknowledge transmission. I ran a diagnostic on the communications system. The transmitter showed green, operating at 84% efficiency. The receiver was functional. The problem wasn't on my end. Could the Oceanic Pioneer have left? Standard protocol required the research vessel to remain on station for 72 hours in case of emergency. But if they'd lost contact with me for too long, Captain Vasquez might have assumed the worst and initiated recovery procedures. Or perhaps the storm system Miranda had mentioned before I lost contact had forced them to move to safer waters. 27 minutes since my first call. I needed to prepare for the possibility that help wasn't coming. I pulled up the external camera feed, scanning the exit passage ahead. It appeared to widen into open water approximately 80 meters forward. If I could reach it, I might be able to begin a controlled ascent. The damaged thrusters would make it challenging, and the compromised hull integrity might not withstand the pressure changes, but it beat sitting here waiting for my oxygen to run out. Abyssal Explorer to Oceanic Pioneer. Final attempt to establish contact before initiating self-rescue procedures. I waited, finger hovering over the controls to begin the journey toward open water. Then, a burst of static, followed by fragments of a voice. Nick Pion to Abyss. Repeat. I sat up straight, adjusting the receiver again, boosting gain to maximum. This is Abyssal Explorer. I'm receiving you, but signal is weak. Please repeat. More static then. Locked onto signal. Stay position. My heart rate spiked. They were there. They'd received my beacon. I moved my hands across the control panel, rerouting even more power to the communication array. Oceanic Pioneer. Signal strength improving but still weak. Please confirm you've received my coordinates. 33 minutes since my first transmission. The life support timer read 1:59:14. I watched the sonar display, constantly checking for any sign of the megalodon. The creature remained in the caldera, but its movements had become more directed. It was swimming in expanding circles, perhaps searching for me. I reduced power to all non-essential systems, minimizing my acoustic signature. The radio crackled again. Abyssal Explorer, this is Oceanic Pioneer. Signal locked. Maintain position. Rescue underway. Relief flooded through me, quickly tempered by caution. Rescue meant someone would have to come down here, risking their own life. And even if they reached me, docking with a damaged submersible at this depth would be extremely dangerous. Oceanic Pioneer, copy that. Be advised, hull integrity compromised. Port thruster non-functional. Starboard thruster operating at reduced capacity. Life support countdown at 1 hour 55 minutes. I needed to prepare for transfer. The sample storage containers were secured in their shock-absorbent housing, but the external sample bay would need to be manually retrieved. The data drives were ready for quick extraction, their casings designed to withstand pressure changes during rapid ascent. The communication system crackled again, stronger this time. Abyssal Explorer, we have your telemetry. Rescue submersible launching now. ETA 45 minutes. 45 minutes. I did the mental calculation. They would arrive with just over an hour of life support remaining. Cutting it close, but possible. I recognize the voice now. Captain Lenora Vasquez, her tone calm and authoritative despite the situation. Her presence on the radio meant they were taking this seriously. Lenora never handled routine communications. Oceanic Pioneer, this is Abyssal Explorer. Acknowledged. We'll prepare for transfer. I began organizing everything systematically. First, I backed up all data to 3 separate drives, ensuring redundancy. Then I gathered the biological samples, checking each container for integrity. The video footage of the megalodon I stored separately, marking it as highest priority. 47 minutes had passed since my first transmission. The life support timer showed 1:45:21. The radio came alive again, clearer than before. Abyssal Explorer, this is Captain Vasquez. Confirm we have locked onto your signal. Rescue Submersible Sentinel is launching now. Engineer Jefferson piloting. What's your status, Dr. Thorne? I allowed myself a moment of relief at hearing Lenora's voice clearly break through the static. She'd used my title, a small formality that somehow made this nightmare feel more manageable, more professional. Captain Vasquez, this is Dr. Thorne. Current depth 9,125 meters. Hull integrity compromised in sections C and D, showing progressive stress fractures. Life support countdown at 1 hour 45 minutes. Port thruster destroyed. Starboard operating at 60%. I'm monitoring a large biological threat, a living megalodon, currently contained within the caldera, approximately 300 meters from my position. A pause then. Dr. Thorne, did you say megalodon? Affirmative, Captain. Approximately 18 meters in length. I have video documentation and biological samples from its environment. The creature is currently in the caldera, but I'm monitoring sonar for any approach. The channel went silent for a moment. I could imagine the reaction on the bridge of the Oceanic Pioneer. Understood, Dr. Thorne. Engineer Jefferson has been briefed on your situation. Sentinel is rated for 10,000 meters and equipped with emergency docking apparatus. Estimated arrival in 42 minutes. I turned to the sonar display, which I'd programmed to sweep continuously. The megalodon had changed its pattern again. It was now moving along the caldera wall, following what appeared to be a methodical search pattern. Its intelligence continued to surprise me. Captain, be advised that the megalodon appears to be searching for an exit. I recommend Sentinel approach from bearing 090 to avoid potential contact. Copy that, Dr. Thorne. We'll relay to Jefferson. I organized my research materials. Despite my situation, I felt a scientist's pride in my discoveries. A living ecosystem 9 kilometers beneath the surface, centered around a geothermal caldera. Unique adaptations in extremophile organisms, and a megalodon, an apex predator thought extinct for millions of years. The life support timer ticked down to 1:30:05. The submersible groaned as a small shift in water pressure tested the weakened hull. A new warning flashed on the display. Hull integrity section C, critical. I diverted power from the external sample heaters to reinforce the electromagnetic field stabilizing that section. The sonar showed the megalodon still searching the caldera walls, but it had moved closer to the fissure I'd escaped through. If it found that passage, it might follow my trail. I reduced power to the remaining external camera, leaving just enough to monitor the approach vector for the rescue submersible. Abyssal Explorer to Oceanic Pioneer. Hull integrity warning in Section C. Request update on Sentinel's progress. Dr. Thorne, Sentinel reports 28 minutes to your position. Engineer Jefferson asks if you can establish a navigational beacon to guide final approach. I accessed the emergency systems panel. Affirmative. Deploying acoustic beacon now. I activated the subsonic ping generator, which would emit a distinctive signal pattern that Sentinel could home in on during final approach. The device was designed specifically for rescue operations in low visibility conditions. The minutes crept by as I monitored the megalodon's movements and the deteriorating condition of the hull. 15 minutes to Sentinel's estimated arrival. The life support timer read 1:12:33. A new alert on the sonar drew my attention. The megalodon had found the fissure entrance. It circled the opening, its massive body barely fitting into the passage. Then it entered, moving slowly through the narrow space. Captain Vasquez, the megalodon has entered the fissure connecting the caldera to my position. It's moving toward me. The radio crackled with static before Lenora's voice came through. Understood, Dr. Thorne. Sentinel is accelerating to maximum safe speed. Jefferson will attempt to reach you before the creature. I watched the sonar display as the megalodon moved through the narrow passage. It twisted and turned, its body adjusting to the space. Each movement brought it closer to me. Estimated time to intercept? Captain Vasquez asked. I calculated the creature's speed against the length of the passage. Approximately 18 minutes at current speed. Sentinel's ETA? 12 minutes. It's going to be close, Dr. Thorne. I turned back to my preparations, hands moving with practiced efficiency despite the fear gnawing at my insides. I secured the final sample container and triple-checked the data drives. Everything of scientific value was ready for transfer, the evidence of a discovery that would change our understanding of deep-sea ecosystems and evolution. The submersible creaked ominously, and another warning flashed on the display. Hull integrity section D. Critical. The pressure hull was beginning to fail in multiple locations. Even without the megalodon's interference, the Abyssal Explorer wouldn't survive much longer at this depth. I rerouted emergency power to the hull stabilization system, sacrificing the remaining external camera. The cabin lights dimmed to emergency levels, bathing the control console in a soft red glow. Oceanic Pioneer, hull integrity failing in multiple sections. Request Sentinel's current position. Sentinel at 8,000 meters and descending rapidly. 9 minutes to your position. The sonar showed the megalodon continuing its advance through the fissure, now less than 400 meters away. I could almost feel its presence. The ancient predator's relentless pursuit, driven by millions of years of evolutionary perfection. I checked the life support timer, 0:58:12. Less than an hour of breathable air remained. Between the failing hull, the approaching megalodon, and my dwindling oxygen, the margins for survival were razor thin. Dr. Thorne's Sentinel has visual contact with your beacon. Engineer Jefferson is requesting direct communication. Patch him through, Captain. The radio crackled, and a new voice came through. Calm, measured, with the slight drawl of someone raised in the American South. Dr. Thorne, this is Marcus Jefferson piloting Sentinel. I'm on final approach to your position. Can you confirm your submersible's orientation for docking alignment? I checked the navigation display. Sentinel, Abyssal Explorer is oriented bow up at 15 degrees, with emergency docking port facing east, bearing 090. Copy that, Doctor. I have visual on your position. Be advised I'm seeing significant structural damage to your outer hull. Docking will be challenging but doable. I felt a surge of hope at his words. Marcus Jefferson was one of the best submersible pilots in the program, with extensive experience in deep-sea operations and emergency extractions. Marcus, be advised we have a biological threat approaching from the Western Passage. Large predator, extremely dangerous. Understood. I've been briefed on your discovery. Captain Vasquez thought I wouldn't believe it until I saw the footage. The sonar pinged again. The megalodon had increased its speed, now less than 300 meters away and closing faster than I'd calculated. Marcus, threat is accelerating, current distance 280 meters and closing, estimated intercept in 12 minutes. I have visual contact with your submersible, Dr. Thorne. Beginning final approach. ETA 2 minutes to docking position. Through the viewport, I caught a glimpse of movement in the murky distance. For a heart-stopping moment, I feared it was the megalodon approaching from an unexpected direction. But as it drew closer, I recognized the sleek, purpose-built form of the Sentinel Rescue submersible. Its powerful external lights cut through the darkness, illuminating the Abyssal Explorer from the outside for the first time since the attack. Relief washed over me so intensely I had to grip the console to steady myself. After hours alone in the damaged submersible, the sight of the Sentinel was almost overwhelming. Visual contact confirmed, Marcus. I can see you approaching. The Sentinel maneuvered carefully toward the Abyssal Explorer's emergency docking port, its thrusters kicking up small clouds of sediment from the ocean floor. Marcus was taking a direct approach, minimizing the time needed for docking. Dr. Thorne, I'm initiating docking procedure, preparing to extend magnetic coupling arms. I monitored the sonar closely. The megalodon was now 200 meters away and still accelerating. I estimated we had less than 10 minutes before it reached us. Marcus, threat continuing to approach. We need to complete transfer quickly. Copy that. Extending coupling arms now. Stand by for hard dock. Through the viewport, I watched as the Sentinel's mechanical arms extended toward my submersible. The rescue craft positioned itself precisely, aligning with the emergency docking port. I felt a solid thunk as the magnetic couplers connected, followed by the mechanical whir of the docking mechanism engaging. Hard dock achieved, Marcus reported, beginning pressure equalization between airlocks. A new alert sounded from the control panel. Warning, hull integrity section C, failure imminent. The submersible shuddered, and I heard the distinct sound of metal stress, a high-pitched groan that sent chills through my body. Marcus, hull integrity failing, expedite transfer procedure. Pressure equalization at 60%, 2 minutes to complete. The sonar showed the megalodon now just 150 meters away, still accelerating through the passage. At its current speed, it would reach us before the transfer could be completed. Oceanic Pioneer, this is Dr. Thorne. Megalodon approaching rapidly. Request options. Captain Vasquez's voice came through clearly. Dr. Thorne, Engineer Jefferson has authority to deploy countermeasures if necessary. I looked at the rapidly approaching signal on the sonar. Marcus, what countermeasures does Sentinel carry? High-intensity strobe array and acoustic deterrent system. Should create enough sensory overload to buy us time. The pressure equalization between the submersibles completed with a soft hiss. The airlock indicator changed from red to green. Transfer path clear, Dr. Thorne. Begin evacuation immediately. I gathered the data drives and sample containers, securing them in a waterproof transfer bag. The megalodon was now just 100 meters away. Deploying countermeasures, Marcus announced. Through the viewport, I saw brilliant flashes of light as the Sentinel activated its strobe array. The pulses were timed to create maximum visual disorientation for any approaching predator. Simultaneously, a high-pitched acoustic pulse reverberated through the water, designed to interfere with a shark's sensitive electroreception. The sonar showed the megalodon's approach faltering, its straight-line movement becoming erratic as the countermeasures took effect. Countermeasures effective. Megalodon temporarily disoriented at 80 meters distance. Transfer now, Dr. Thorne. I moved quickly to the airlock, the transfer bag clutched tightly against my chest. The samples and data represented months of work and a discovery that would change our understanding of marine biology forever. I couldn't leave them behind. As I opened the inner airlock door, another warning sounded. Critical failure. Hull integrity section C compromised. Water began to seep into the submersible from hairline fractures in the pressure hull. Marcus, hull breach in progress. Water entering Abyssal Explorer. Understood. Airlock is secure. Move quickly, Doctor. I entered the airlock, closed the inner door behind me, and waited for the indicator to confirm the seal. The green light flashed, and I opened the outer door, stepping into the Sentinel. Marcus Jefferson sat at the pilot's controls, his attention divided between the docking procedure and the sonar display. He was younger than I'd expected, perhaps early 30s, with close-cropped hair and focused eyes that flicked between displays with practiced efficiency. "Welcome aboard, Dr. Thorne. Secure yourself immediately. We need to detach and ascend." I moved to the passenger seat, securing the transfer bag to a designated storage compartment before strapping myself in. Through the viewport, I could see water now flowing freely into the Abyssal Explorer through visible cracks in the hull. Initiating emergency detach sequence, Marcus announced, his hands moving across the control panel. The sonar showed the Megalodon recovering from the countermeasures, resuming its approach. It was now just 60 meters away. Detach complete, retracting coupling arms. The Sentinel shuddered slightly as it disconnected from the Abyssal Explorer. Marcus immediately engaged the thrusters, pulling us away from the failing submersible. "Oceanic Pioneer, this is Sentinel. We have Dr. Thorne aboard. Beginning emergency ascent." The Abyssal Explorer's hull collapsed inward as we moved away, the pressure finally overwhelming the weakened structure. The implosion created a shockwave that rocked the Sentinel, pushing us further from the site. On the sonar, the Megalodon appeared to be investigating the collapsing submersible, momentarily distracted from our presence. Marcus took advantage of the distraction, positioning the Sentinel for the most efficient ascent path. "Dr. Thorne, prepare for rapid ascent. Emergency decompression protocols will be managed automatically." I checked my harness, ensuring I was securely fastened. The transfer bag was locked down, its precious contents safe for the journey to the surface. The sonar pinged an alert. The Megalodon had lost interest in the imploded submersible and was now moving toward us. Threat approaching, bearing 270, speed estimated at 8 knots, I reported, falling back on scientific precision to manage my fear. "Acknowledged," Marcus replied calmly. "Initiating emergency ascent now." The Sentinel's powerful ascent thrusters engaged, pushing us upward with considerable force. I felt the pressure in my ears change as the submersible began its journey to the surface. The sonar showed the Megalodon in pursuit, but the creature's advantage in horizontal movement didn't translate to vertical speed. We began to pull away, the distance between us increasing. "Threat falling behind," I noted with relief. "Current distance 120 meters and increasing." Marcus nodded without taking his eyes off the controls. "We'll maintain maximum safe ascent velocity. At this rate, we should reach the surface in approximately 70 minutes. I looked back at the sonar. The Megalodon was still there but had slowed, not following us far from its deep water territory. The ancient predator remained a mystery, a living fossil that had survived in isolation for millions of years. Hull integrity warnings from the Sentinel system interrupted my thoughts, growing more frequent as the rescue submersible strained against the rapid pressure changes of our emergency ascent. With the Abyssal Explorer completely failed, I knew we must work quickly before the Sentinel systems were also compromised. "We need to get your data transferred to our systems," Marcus said. "The faster we finish that, the sooner we can focus on our ascent protocol." I nodded, my hands already working to retrieve the external hard drives from my transfer bag. The data I'd collected represented a scientific goldmine, evidence of an ecosystem no one had documented before, not to mention proof of a living megalodon. The thought sent a chill through me. That creature wasn't just a discovery. It had nearly killed me. "Right," I said, pulling out the first drive. "Where's your data port?" Marcus gestured to a panel on the right side of the cabin. "Input's there. System should recognize and back up automatically." The Sentinel was far more advanced than my Abyssal Explorer, newer tech, better protection systems. I connected the first drive, watching as files began transferring. Through the viewport, I could see fragments of my former vessel drifting downward, the implosion scattering debris across the ocean floor. "How long will the transfer take?" Marcus asked, dividing his attention between the ascent controls and the integrity warnings. 10 minutes for the complete data set," I said, wiping sweat from my forehead. "I also have biological samples that need to go into cold storage." Marcus pointed toward a small compartment near the floor. "Preservation unit there. It's at 4 degrees Celsius." I retrieved the sample containers from my bag, vials of water from various depths, tissue samples from the tube worms, bacterial specimens from the mats surrounding the hydrothermal vents, each one carefully labeled, despite my rush to escape the failing Abyssal Explorer. As I secured the samples in the preservation unit, I kept glancing at the sonar. The Megalodon's signature had disappeared from the screen. That didn't mean it was gone, just that it had moved out of range or was positioned where the acoustic signals couldn't reach. "I don't see it anymore," I said. Marcus adjusted our course slightly. "That's good news, but we're not taking chances. I'm maintaining maximum ascent rate within safety parameters." The data transfer reached 60% as I secured the last biological samples. My hands moved quickly, but my mind raced with what I had discovered. The caldera held a complete ecosystem, cut off from the rest of the ocean, featuring a food chain led by a predator that should have been extinct millions of years ago. My thoughts were interrupted by a sudden alarm. Marcus leaned forward, studying the sonar with intense focus. "What is it?" I asked, moving to get a better view of the display. "Large biological signature," Marcus said, his voice tight. "Different bearing than before." I looked at the screen, feeling my muscles tense. The signature was massive, the Megalodon, no question, but it wasn't where we'd last seen it. Instead of falling behind us, it had somehow circled around and was now approaching from the north. "It found the fissure," I said, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. "The same fissure I used to escape the caldera." Marcus nodded grimly. "And it's moving fast, heading directly toward our position." I watched the distance marker on the sonar counting down rapidly. The creature was moving at nearly 15 knots, far faster than I'd seen it swim in the caldera. "We need to disconnect from your submersible," Marcus said. "Now." I looked at the data transfer, 83% complete. "Can we wait until—" "No," Marcus cut me off, already hitting commands on his console. "That thing will be on us in less than 2 minutes. We need to move." I disconnected the hard drive, accepting the incomplete transfer. The most critical data had already copied over. The rest would have to wait. I secured the drive back in my bag and strapped myself into the seat next to Marcus. "Transfer aborted," I confirmed. "Ready to move." Marcus activated the separation sequence. The Sentinel shuddered as magnetic locks disengaged from what remained of the Abyssal Explorer's airlock. Indicator lights switched from red to green as the rescue vessel became fully independent. "Separation complete," Marcus reported, immediately redirecting power to the main thrusters. "Hold on." The acceleration pushed me back into my seat. On the sonar, the Megalodon's signature grew larger as it approached our position. I watched the bearing and distance markers with growing alarm. "Marcus, it's nearly here. Less than 500 meters in closing." He didn't respond verbally, just nodded and pushed the thrust controls forward another notch. The Sentinel's frame vibrated with the strain of maximum output. I focused on the camera feeds, switching until I found the rear view. The water was dark, lit only by our external lights, creating a small area of visibility in the darkness. Then I saw it, a massive shape moving through the water with graceful power. The Megalodon had found us. There, I pointed to the screen. It's right behind us. The shark was fully visible now, its enormous body filling the camera view. Even through the digital feed, its size was overwhelming, at least 60 feet of prehistoric predator, eyes fixed on our small vessel with predatory focus. "Marcus, we need to move faster." The words came out louder than I intended. "This is maximum thrust," he said, his voice remaining controlled despite the urgency. "I need you to help navigate. Your entry data should show the safest route out." I pulled up the navigation log from my earlier descent into the caldera, displaying it on the shared screen between us. The path I'd taken in was clearly marked, a winding route through underwater volcanic formations and narrow passages. "Here," I said, tracing the path with my finger. "This is how I came in, but there are sections too narrow for your vessel." Marcus glanced at the display. "Find us an alternative. Something wide enough for the Sentinel, but that might slow down our friend back there." I scanned the topographical data, looking for passages that would accommodate the Sentinel's larger frame. The rescue submersible was more robust than my exploratory vessel, built for durability rather than maneuverability. "Take this channel here," I said, highlighting a route that veered northeast. "It opens into a secondary chamber, then connects to a series of lava tubes that lead to open water." Marcus adjusted our course, directing the Sentinel toward the passage I'd indicated. The submersible responded sluggishly, the engines straining against the rapid pressure changes of our ascent. Behind us, the Megalodon closed the distance with frightening speed. On the camera feed, I could see its mouth beginning to open, rows of serrated teeth visible as it prepared to strike. "Brace!" Marcus called, just before the submersible lurched violently. The impact wasn't direct. The Megalodon had snapped at our wake, its teeth grazing the rear sensor array. Warning lights flashed across the console, but the hull integrity remained stable. "Damage report?" I asked, my heart pounding. "External sensors compromised," Marcus replied, eyes fixed on his controls. "Navigation still functional. Approaching the channel entrance now." The passage loomed ahead, a dark gap in the underwater rock formation, barely wider than our vessel. Marcus guided the Sentinel toward it, adjusting our angle to match the narrow opening. "This is going to be tight," he warned. I watched as the rocky walls closed in around us. The lights illuminated the passage, showing jagged volcanic rock on all sides. The Sentinel shuddered as we entered the channel, the clearance so tight I could hear the scrape of rock against our hull. Behind us, the Megalodon hesitated at the channel entrance. Its massive body circled once, then plunged into the passage after us. Even in the confined space, its power was terrifying. "It's still coming," I reported, watching the rear camera. Marcus focused on navigating the twisting passage. "How wide does this channel get?" I checked the topographical data. It widens about 200 meters ahead, then narrows again before opening into the secondary chamber. The Sentinel shuddered again as we scraped against an outcropping of rock. The impact was minor, but in our damaged state, every contact increased the risk of hull failure. "Sorry," Marcus said, adjusting the steering. "It's hard to see, and these passages weren't meant for casual tours." Despite the tension, I almost smiled at his attempt at humor. The Sentinel pushed forward, its lights illuminating each new section of the passage as we advanced. Behind us, the megalodon continued its pursuit, its massive body contorting to fit through the confined space. We reached the wider section I'd mentioned, and Marcus took advantage of the extra room to increase our speed. The sentinel surged forward, putting a little more distance between us and the predator. "Secondary chamber ahead," I said, pointing to a large, open space on the topographical display. "Once we're through that, we'll hit the final passage leading to open water." Marcus nodded. "And our friend?" I glanced at the rear camera. The megalodon was still following, its movements hampered by the narrow passage, but its determination undiminished. "Still with us. The chamber might give it room to build up speed again." "Then we don't linger," Marcus said, pushing the thrust controls forward once more. The passage widened suddenly as we entered the secondary chamber. The space was vast compared to the narrow channel we'd just traversed, with a high ceiling and multiple exits leading in different directions. Our lights barely reached the distant walls. Marcus maintained our course toward the exit passage I'd identified earlier. The sentinel moved more freely in the open water of the chamber, responding better to the controls. The megalodon entered the chamber, its massive body stretching out now that it had room to move. It looked even bigger in the open space, its movements smooth and deliberate. "It's gaining on us," I said, watching the distance between us shrink rapidly on the sonar. "How much farther to the exit?" Marcus asked, his voice tense. 80 meters to the passage entrance," I replied, checking the navigation display. "Then about 300 meters through the final tunnel to open water." The megalodon closed the gap with powerful sweeps of its tail. On the camera feed, I could see its massive head coming directly toward us, mouth beginning to open once more. "It's going to hit us," I warned, gripping the edges of my seat. Marcus made a sudden course change, veering sharply to port. The maneuver caused the sentinel to roll slightly, throwing me against my harness. The megalodon shot past our starboard side, missing us by mere feet. "Nice move," I said, breathing hard. "It won't fall for that twice," Marcus replied, already adjusting our course back toward the exit passage. "How wide is this final tunnel?" I checked the data. "Variable. Starts at about 15 meters wide, narrows to around 8 meters at the tightest point." Marcus nodded. "And our friend is what? 18, 20 meters long?" I understood his thinking immediately. The passage might be too narrow for it to follow. "That's the hope," he said, guiding the sentinel toward the exit. The megalodon recovered from its missed attack and turned to pursue us once more. Its speed in open water was incredible, far faster than any living shark I'd ever observed. We reached the entrance to the final passage with the predator only seconds behind us. The tunnel was dark, lit only by our lights as we entered. The walls were smooth, worn by water, but close enough to make navigation tricky. The sentinel moved forward steadily, with Marcus keeping us centered to avoid the walls. Behind us, the megalodon entered the passage, its massive body filling the tunnel from floor to ceiling. Its progress slowed as the passage narrowed, forcing it to reduce its speed to navigate the confined space. "It's still following," I said, "but it's struggling with the tight fit." Marcus kept his focus on our own navigation. "How much farther to the narrowest section?" "About 150 meters, I replied, checking the data. "Then another 100 or so to open water." The sentinel continued forward, the hull occasionally scraping against outcroppings in the tunnel wall. Each contact sent a shudder through the frame, but the vessel maintained its integrity. As we approached the narrowest part of the passage, I could see the walls closing in around us. The clearance on either side of the sentinel reduced to less than a meter. "This is it," I said. The choke point. Marcus slowed our pace slightly, ensuring precise navigation through the restricted space. The sentinel moved forward carefully, the external lights revealing the tight confines of the passage ahead. Behind us, the megalodon continued its pursuit, but its progress had slowed significantly. The massive shark was clearly struggling with the narrowing tunnel, its body too large for the confined space. "It's having trouble," I said, watching the rear camera. "The passage is getting too tight." Marcus didn't reply, his attention fully focused on guiding the sentinel through the narrowest section. The submersible scraped hard against the wall, the sound of rock against metal echoing through the cabin. Warning lights flashed, indicating damage to external sensors. "External array damaged," Marcus said, his voice tight. "Still have manual control." I kept my eyes on the rear camera, watching as the megalodon pushed forward into the narrowing passage. The creature's determination was remarkable and terrifying. Its massive body compressed against the tunnel walls, scales scraping against rock as it forced its way forward. "It's still coming," I said, unable to keep the disbelief from my voice. The sentinel passed through the narrowest point of the passage, the clearance so tight that both sides of the hull scraped against the walls simultaneously. The noise was deafening inside the cabin, metal groaning under the pressure of contact. Behind us, the megalodon reached the same narrow section. Its head pushed through, jaws still snapping in pursuit, but its body wedged against the restricted opening. The creature thrashed, trying to force its way through, but the passage was simply too narrow for its girth. "It's stuck," I exclaimed, watching the massive shark struggle against the confines of the tunnel. Marcus didn't take his eyes off his controls. "Don't celebrate yet." "How far to open water?" "Less than 100 meters, I replied, checking the navigation display. "The passage widens from here." The sentinel moved more freely as we passed beyond the choke point, the tunnel gradually expanding around us. Behind us, the megalodon continued to thrash, its massive body unable to fit through the narrowest section of the passage. "It can't follow us," I said, relief washing over me. "The passage is too small." As if hearing my words, the megalodon suddenly ceased its forward struggles. On the camera feed, I watched in amazement as the creature began to back up, its body moving in reverse out of the narrow section. "It's retreating," I said. "Going back to the secondary chamber." Marcus nodded. "Smart. It knows its limitations." We continued through the widening passage, the sentinel's external lights illuminating our path toward open water. The sonar showed the megalodon's signature moving away from us, back toward the larger chamber we'd left behind. "Approaching exit point," Marcus reported, his voice calmer now. "Depth reading shows we're at 8,500 meters. The tunnel began to brighten ahead as we neared its end. The walls fell away gradually, revealing the vast expanse of open ocean beyond. After the confined spaces we'd traversed, the seemingly endless water ahead was a welcome sight. The sentinel emerged from the passage into open water, leaving the volcanic formations behind. I checked the rear camera one last time, but there was no sign of the megalodon. The sonar confirmed what the visual feed showed. The prehistoric predator had returned to its sanctuary within the caldera. "We're clear," Marcus confirmed, adjusting our course for a steady ascent. Setting course for the surface. I leaned back in my seat, the tension slowly draining from my body. Through the viewport, I could see nothing but dark ocean water, but it was the most beautiful view I could imagine at that moment. On the sonar, I watched as the megalodon's signature moved back through the secondary chamber and into the main caldera. The ancient predator had retreated to its volcanic home, circling back into its prehistoric sanctuary while we escaped into open water. I turned toward the rear viewport. Somewhere down in that darkness was my creation, the Abyssal Explorer. I had designed her systems, spent years perfecting her capabilities for deep-sea research. Now she was lost to the abyss, abandoned in my desperate escape from a predator that science had declared extinct millions of years ago. She was a good vessel, I said, watching as the last traces of the caldera disappeared from view. The Abyssal Explorer had taken me deeper than any human had gone before, shown me things no one else had ever seen. And now she would become another secret of the deep, another piece of human technology claimed by the ocean. Marcus glanced at me. "I'm sorry about your submersible, Dr. Thorne. I know how much work went into it." "It was worth it," I said, surprised to find I actually meant it. "What we discovered down there, it changes everything." As we continued our ascent, Marcus reached for the communication panel. "Sentinel to Oceanic Pioneer, do you copy? Captain Vasquez, this is Engineer Jefferson." The radio crackled before a voice cut through the static. "This is Captain Vasquez. We read you, Sentinel. Status report." "Extraction successful, Captain," Marcus reported, his professional tone belying the ordeal we'd just survived. "We have Dr. Thorne aboard. The Abyssal Explorer has been lost, but we're ascending safely. Current depth 8,000 meters and climbing." "Copy that, Sentinel. Medical team is standing by. What's your ETA?" Marcus checked the instruments. "At current ascent rate, we should reach the surface in approximately 90 minutes. Dr. Thorne appears physically stable but will require medical assessment upon arrival." "Understood. Maintain current course and speed. We'll be tracking you all the way up." "Roger that. Sentinel out." Marcus switched off the comm and turned to me. "How are you holding up, Doctor?" I ran a hand through my sweat-soaked hair. "I'm alive. That counts for something." Now that our immediate survival wasn't in question, my mind turned to the enormity of what I'd found. A living megalodon, an entire ecosystem hidden in a geothermal refugium at the bottom of the Marianas Trench. Evidence that would rewrite textbooks and challenge fundamental assumptions about extinction and evolution. "Marcus," I said, sitting up straighter despite my fatigue, "I need to start documenting everything while it's fresh in my mind. Do you have recording capability in here?" He nodded and pressed a button on the console. "Cabin recorder is active, time-stamped and linked to our current position and depth. Whenever you're ready." I took a deep breath. Where did one even begin when describing something so monumentally significant? "This is Dr. Eris Thorne, lead scientist on the Marianas Deep Exploration Project. Date and time is recorded. I am currently aboard the rescue submersible Sentinel, following an emergency extraction from the Abyssal Explorer at a depth of approximately 9,000 meters in the Marianas Trench." The words started slowly at first, but soon I was speaking rapidly, trying to capture every detail before my exhausted mind could forget anything important. During descent, I identified an underwater volcanic caldera with a breach in its wall. Inside this caldera, I discovered a geothermal refugium, an isolated ecosystem sustained by heat from hydrothermal vents. Water temperature inside the caldera ranged between 5 and 20 degrees Celsius, significantly warmer than the surrounding deep ocean environment. Marcus kept his focus on piloting, but I could see him listening intently, occasionally glancing at the sonar display to ensure our prehistoric pursuer hadn't somehow followed us. The caldera contained diverse biological communities unlike anything previously documented at these depths. Bacterial mats, tube worms of unprecedented size, and several unidentified fish species that appear to have evolved in isolation. Most significantly, I paused, still hardly believing it myself. I encountered a living specimen of Otodus megalodon, a species thought to have gone extinct approximately 3.6 million years ago. I continued detailing the megalodon's estimated dimensions, behavior patterns, and the attacks on the submersible. I described the physical features I'd observed, the hunting strategies it employed, and the evidence of intelligence it displayed, all information that contradicted existing theories about prehistoric shark behavior. The specimen exhibited problem-solving capabilities and strategic hunting behavior far beyond what we would expect from modern sharks. It appeared to understand the vulnerability of the submersible and targeted specific structural weaknesses. It also demonstrated an ability to manipulate its prey, forcing the submersible toward hazards like hydrothermal vents. As I spoke, I checked the status of the hard drives we'd managed to salvage from the Abyssal Explorer. The incomplete data transfer was frustrating, but we had secured the most critical files, including video evidence of the megalodon. This discovery represents a living fossil of unprecedented significance, I continued. It suggests the possibility that other species presumed extinct may have found similar refuges in extreme environments. The implications for evolutionary biology, marine ecology, and our understanding of extinction events are profound. The depth gauge now showed 6,000 meters. We were making good progress toward the surface, and with each passing minute, I felt more certain that we had escaped the immediate danger. Still, I couldn't help glancing at the sonar display, half expecting to see that massive signature reappear. The geothermal refugium itself is equally significant, I added. It represents a previously unknown type of deep-sea ecosystem, one that may have remained stable and isolated for millions of years. The water chemistry, bacterial communities, and adapted fauna present research opportunities that could lead to breakthroughs in numerous scientific fields. I paused my recording to check our progress again. 5,000 meters. We were past the halfway point. Marcus noticed my attention to the depth gauge. "We're making good time, Dr. Thorne. All systems functioning normally." I nodded, grateful for his calm competence. "I don't think I properly thanked you for saving my life down there." "Just doing my job," he replied with a modest smile. Though I have to admit, when they said we were rescuing a scientist from a submersible, I wasn't expecting to be outrunning a prehistoric shark. Not exactly in the job description, is it? I managed a tired laugh. "When we get back, I'll make sure Captain Vasquez knows you went above and beyond." "I'd appreciate that." His expression turned more serious. "Dr. Thorne, what you found down there, it's going to change things, isn't it? I mean, a living megalodon, that's going to be worldwide news." The question made me pause. In my excitement about the scientific significance, I hadn't fully considered the broader implications. News of a living megalodon would create a media frenzy. There would be pressure from countless directions, academic institutions wanting research access, government agencies asserting jurisdiction, private interests seeing commercial opportunities. It will change things, I agreed. But we need to be careful how we present this. That creature down there has survived in isolation for millions of years. The last thing we want is a gold rush of submarines and research vessels disrupting its habitat or trying to capture it. You think that's what would happen? I thought of previous discoveries that had led to exploitation rather than protection. History suggests it's likely. People have a way of destroying what they find fascinating. As we continued our ascent, I resumed my recording, now focusing on the implications and recommendations for future research. I emphasized the need for careful, controlled study that would prioritize preservation of the unique ecosystem. By the time I finished, we had reached the final stages of our ascent. 300 meters to surface, Marcus announced, preparing for final ascent protocols. I looked out through the viewport. The water was growing lighter as we neared the surface, transitioning from the absolute black of the deep to a navy blue that gradually lightened. After so many hours in darkness, even this dim light seemed bright to my eyes. "Sentinel to Oceanic Pioneer. We are approaching surface," Marcus radioed. "Request confirmation of position and weather conditions." "Pioneer to Sentinel. We confirm your approach. Weather conditions stable. Light chop on surface. We have visual contact with your ascent bubbles. Medical team is standing by." "Roger that. Beginning final ascent." I watched as the depth counter ticked down. 200 meters, 100 meters, 50 meters. The light grew stronger, and I could make out the silhouette of the Oceanic Pioneer above us. "Brace for surface breach," Marcus warned as we made our final approach. The Sentinel broke the surface with a gentle surge, bobbing in the open air for the first time in hours. I felt a wave of emotion wash over me, relief, exhaustion, exhilaration all mixed together. We had made it back. Against all odds, I had seen something impossible and lived to tell about it. The Sentinel maneuvered toward the research vessel, where I could see crew members preparing the crane system to lift us aboard. Marcus completed the docking procedures with practiced efficiency, securing us to the lifting mechanism. "Prepare for extraction," he said, gathering his equipment. "They'll lift us onto the deck and then we can disembark." I nodded, collecting the sample containers and hard drives. Every piece of evidence was precious now. Physical proof of what would otherwise sound like a fantastic tale. The crane lifted the Sentinel from the water, swinging us over the deck of the Oceanic Pioneer. I felt a slight bump as we were lowered onto the secure platform, followed by the mechanical sounds of the docking clamps engaging. "All secure," Marcus confirmed, equalizing pressure for hatch opening. After a moment, he twisted the hatch mechanism and pushed it open. Bright sunlight and fresh sea air rushed in, almost overwhelming after hours in the confined space of the submersible. I blinked against the light, taking in deep breaths of the clean air. Marcus climbed out first, turning back to help me with my equipment. As I emerged onto the deck of the Oceanic Pioneer, I saw a crowd had gathered. The medical team, research assistants, and crew members all watching with expressions ranging from concern to curiosity. Dr. Eliza Wentworth pushed through the group, her face tight with worry. Behind her came Miranda Kolchak, clipboard in hand as always. "Eris," Eliza called out, reaching me first. Her hands were immediately on my shoulders, eyes scanning for injuries. "My God, are you all right? We thought we'd lost you when the communications went dark." "I'm okay, Eliza," I assured her, though my legs felt unsteady on the gently rocking deck. "No injuries, just tired." Miranda reached us next, her professional demeanor cracking slightly to reveal genuine concern. "Dr. Thorne, we need to get you to medical for assessment. Captain's orders." "In a minute," I said, gripping the case containing the hard drives. "First, I need to show you all something. Something impossible." Eliza's eyebrows rose. "What happened down there?" "The last communication we received indicated some kind of encounter with a large biological entity." I looked around at the gathered faces, all waiting for an explanation. How could I possibly convey what I'd experienced? Words seemed inadequate. "Is there a way to connect this to the main lab display?" I asked, holding up the primary data drive. Miranda nodded. "Yes, we can set that up immediately." "Then let's do that first. Trust me, you need to see this before anything else." Despite protests from the medical team, I insisted on going directly to the research lab. Miranda led the way, with Eliza staying close beside me, her scientific curiosity clearly piqued by my urgency. The main lab was equipped with a large display screen used for analyzing data and imagery from our expeditions. Miranda quickly set up the connection to the hard drive, while I sank gratefully into a chair. My legs were still adjusting to the ship's movement after hours in the submersible. "Everyone who needs to see this, get in here now," I called out to the team members who had followed us. Captain Vasquez entered last, her expression serious. "Dr. Thorne, I understand your excitement, but I must insist that you submit to medical examination after this brief presentation," she said firmly. "Understood, Captain. This won't take long." Once the drive was connected, I navigated to the video files and selected the clearest footage of the megalodon. I paused before playing it, looking around at my colleagues. "What you're about to see challenges everything we know about marine evolutionary history and extinction events," I said. "I found something in that caldera that shouldn't exist." I pressed play. The video began with murky footage of the caldera interior, showing the hydrothermal vents and bacterial mats I'd documented. Then the camera panned, and there it was, the massive form of the megalodon swimming into view, its prehistoric silhouette unmistakable. Gasps filled the room. Eliza's hand went to her mouth. Miranda stopped writing mid-note, her pen hovering above her clipboard. That's not possible," someone whispered. "It's not just a large shark," I explained as the footage continued, showing the creature circling the submersible. "This is Otodus megalodon. 60 feet long, distinctive morphology matching fossil records. Note the dorsal fin shape, the tail structure, the proportional jaw size, all consistent with paleontological reconstructions." The footage continued, showing the megalodon's first attack on the submersible. More gasps as the massive jaws struck the vessel, rocking it violently. "This specimen is alive and well in a geothermally heated caldera at the bottom of the Marianas Trench," I continued. "It's part of a completely isolated ecosystem that has apparently remained stable for millions of years." I advanced to another section of footage, showing the hydrothermal vents and surrounding biological communities. The caldera functions as a refugium, a protected pocket where conditions have remained suitable for species that disappeared elsewhere. Water temperatures range from 5 to 20 degrees Celsius near the vents, much warmer than the surrounding deep ocean environment. The scientific team gathered closer to the screen, their initial shock giving way to professional curiosity. Questions began to pour out. "How large would you estimate the caldera to be? Did you observe any other megafauna species? Was there evidence of a breeding population? How is the food web structured to support an apex predator of that size?" I answered as best I could, explaining the limited observations I'd been able to make before the megalodon attacked. "The caldera is approximately 3 kilometers in diameter. I observed several unidentified fish species that have clearly evolved in isolation, as well as massive tube worm colonies near the vents. As for whether there's more than one megalodon, I can't say for certain. The specimen I encountered showed signs of past injuries that suggest interaction with other large predators." Captain Vasquez, who had remained silent during the initial presentation, finally spoke. "Dr. Thorne, while this discovery is undeniably significant, I'm concerned about the loss of the Abyssal Explorer and the risks you faced. What exactly happened down there?" I described the sequence of events, the initial encounter, the attacks, my attempts to use the hydrothermal vents as protection, and finally, the desperate escape through the fissure. As I spoke, I could see the captain's expression shifting from concern to amazement. "This changes everything," Eliza said when I finished. Her initial skepticism had transformed into excitement. A living specimen of a species thought extinct for over 3 million years. The evolutionary implications alone are staggering. "Not just the shark," I added. "The entire ecosystem represents an evolutionary time capsule, species that have developed in isolation, adapting to conditions that disappeared elsewhere on the planet millions of years ago. Miranda, ever practical, was already thinking ahead. We need to establish research protocols immediately. This discovery will attract attention from institutions worldwide. We should consider applying for protected status for the site. I nodded emphatically. That's exactly what we need to do. This isn't just about scientific discovery. It's about responsible stewardship. We need to organize a properly equipped return expedition, but with strict protections for this extraordinary ecosystem. The energy in the room was electric. Research teams were already breaking into discussion groups, outlining preliminary plans for follow-up studies and the equipment that would be needed. Captain Vasquez stepped away to contact the Research Institute headquarters, while Miranda began drafting initial protection proposals. After answering as many questions as I could, I finally submitted to the medical examination. The doctor found no physical injuries, but prescribed rest and monitoring for delayed symptoms of stress or pressure-related conditions. By the time I was cleared, the research team had already begun organizing the preliminary data and preparing for our return to port. Hours later, as the Oceanic Pioneer set course for land, I stood alone at the stern railing. The sun was setting, casting golden light across the water's surface. Somewhere far below, beyond human sight, lay a world unchanged for millions of years, a living window into Earth's ancient past. I gripped the railing, feeling the cool metal under my fingers. The ocean stretched endlessly before me, its surface peaceful and ordinary. No one looking at it would guess the secrets it held in its depths, the creatures that defied scientific consensus, the ecosystems that rewrote our understanding of life's persistence. My life's work had led to this moment. Years of research, countless expeditions, all culminating in a discovery that would transform scientific understanding. I knew the coming weeks and months would be a whirlwind of academic papers, presentations, and planning for the return expedition. But for now, I simply stood at the railing, staring at the ocean's surface, keenly aware that deep below existed a prehistoric world, unchanged for millions of years, a discovery that would rewrite scientific understanding and transform my life forever.